Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established amongst us for all generations. Amen, amen, namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I have received communication from Mr. Esmond Ford, MP, member for Tunapuna, who has requested leave of absence from the period February 23rd to March 8th, 2023. The leave which the member seeks is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 1, the strategic plan of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority for the period 2023 to 2025. Paper number 2, the audited financial statements of the Deposit Insurance Corporation for the year ended September 30th, 2022. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Tobago Regional Health Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2013. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 2 and 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that papers 2 and 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. I have the honour to lay the following papers. Papers 4 and 5, the ministerial responses to the 4th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the impact of landfills on the environment of Trinidad and Tobago. These responses are from the Ministries of Planning and Development and Rural Development and Local Government. Papers 6 and 7, the ministerial responses to the 4th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on an inquiry into the role of the state in preserving the cultural heritage of Indigenous peoples, First Peoples of Trinidad and Tobago. These responses are from the Ministries of Sport and Community Development and Education. Paper number 8, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts to the 8th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2021. Paper number 9, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 7th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission for the financial years 2014 to 2018. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Point Appeal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries recently met with the officials of the government of Venezuela to discuss the drug and gas field, will the Prime Minister state if the government of Venezuela has agreed with or will facilitate the terms set out by the government of the United States of America license to monetize the drug and gas field?
Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oh, good. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My apologies for later. Madam Speaker, could the member just repeat the question, please?
Honorable Prime Minister, given that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries recently met with the officials of the government of Venezuela to discuss the drug and gas field, will the Prime Minister state if the government of Venezuela has agreed with or will facilitate the terms set out by the government of the United States of America license to monetize the drug and gas field?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Speaker. Given that the question mentions the statement of the minister, I take it that the member also would have heard the minister answering this question by saying that we are engaged in discussions with the government of Venezuela and that these discussions are progressing well and they are ongoing. And he also mentioned that there's a certain amount of confidentiality that is required at this stage, at this very sensitive stage. So having said that, Madam Speaker, I can provide the member with no further information other than what the government has made public through the ministerial statement.
Member for Point of Appeal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Follow up to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, based on what you just reported, could you state if the government, your government, will be sticking strictly to the conditions stipulated by the United States government on this license?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the license has terms that have been made public, and if we are to accept the license, then the terms of the license apply. And with respect to affecting the operations of access to the field, what I just said is what applies, that we are negotiating with Venezuela with respect to complying with the contents of the license. And I will not be in a position here at this sensitive stage to make any statement at this time.
Member for Point of Appeal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, you said you're negotiating at this stage. Could you give the country an idea when you feel the negotiations will be completed?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, these negotiations require patience. They're between two countries that are discussing matters of a very sensitive nature. And when that time comes and we have something to report, we will report it to the national community as we have done all along.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, not meaning to divulge information on the negotiations, but could you indicate exactly who met with Minister Stuart Young last Wednesday in Caracas? Who exactly did the minister meet with as part of the Venezuelan delegation?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Energy called a press conference. There was a press conference on Thursday, and this particular question was answered even before it was asked. I will advise my colleague to look for the government's public statement as made by the minister, and you will see whatever you want there on that matter.
Member for Point of Appeal.
Question number 2, Madam Speaker, to the Prime Minister. Honourable Prime Minister, given your statement that the government had initially sought a 10-year license from the government of the United States of America to monetize the drug and gas field, will the Prime Minister specifically state whether the 2-year period granted by the United States will be sufficient to encourage investors to establish required infrastructure and deliver first gas supply from this project?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, this question was answered even before it was asked, because the minister on Thursday specifically addressed this very question, which came from the media. And the answer was that OFAC can only grant up to 2 years in a license. And as that is so, having granted us the maximum that OFAC can grant, an extension or the required extensions into the operations of the field, which would be a lot longer than 2 years, is not an obstacle to the development of the negotiations or the explorations on the field. And the fact that a license has been granted has stimulated interest of those who are already operating in Trinidad and Tobago. And I might dare say excitement at the prospect of cross-border gas coming to Trinidad and all that that means for Trinidad and Tobago. So I would simply ask my colleagues on the other side to not expect the government to answer questions about confidential matters or to predict a future which has not been determined at this point in time. The government volunteered these answers on Thursday. The very answer to this question was volunteered by the member on Thursday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Follow up to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, based on your response, could you state if the energy companies who will be investing in this project, this is Dragon Gas project, if they are in agreement with the initial 2-year time frame license by the United States government?
Prime Minister.
The companies which are involved, which is the Shell and NGC, they're not only in agreement, they are excited by it. And I want to point out to the member that Chevron got the first OFAC license. It was for 6 months. And Chevron is producing its oil, selling in the US market, and is aiming to expand its operation on a 6-month license. Chevron's OFAC license was for 6 months. Trinidad and Tobago OFAC license for 2 years, which is the maximum that could have been granted under US law.
Member for Naparimo.
Honorable Prime Minister, in the light of government's recent announcement that Trinidad and Tobago is still on the European Union's tax blacklist, will the Prime Minister indicate whether this has led to the banks in Brussels, Belgium, closing or threatening to close Trinidad and Tobago bank accounts?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the closure of the bank accounts are not as a result of the EU tax list. They were done as part of the EU countries' mitigation of anti-money laundering risks. The closing of the bank account of some diplomatic missions by Belgian banks came as a result of the application of the EU law on anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. Recently, Bpost Bank Brussels notified the embassy in Brussels that they will be closing their account at the bank by February 20th, 2023. The embassy requested an extension of time to find a new account and was given until May 2023 to do so.
Member for Orupuchis.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, in confirming that the banks have indeed closed the accounts of the embassy in Brussels, could you indicate whether this has led to those, to the mission itself, the embassy being inoperable?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I would ask my colleagues to pay attention to the answer. The embassy has asked for an extension. They've got one until May. Today is the 23rd of February, and therefore May has not yet come. The operation of the account is still going on and can go on until May, so there's no question of operations at the embassy being affected by a closure.
Which is?
Prime Minister, could you also confirm that in 2018, Scotiabank also closed the accounts of the Trinidad and Tobago Embassy in Panama over the very matter?
I do not have that information. I know that the member travels about to look at accounts, and he might have had that, but I do not have that information.
Prime Minister, as a follow-up, is the Prime Minister saying that the The threat of closure of the bank accounts at the embassy in Brussels is completely disassociated with the matter of the blacklist that Trinidad and Tobago remains on the tax blacklist.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have answered the question telling the member the reason for the closure. If the member wants to go further afield, he may have information which I do not have.
For Orpuch East.
Prime Minister, could you also indicate whether or not one specific bank, Deutsche Bank, indeed has moved to close all accounts of the Trinidad and Tobago government throughout the world?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I know of no bank called Deutsche Bank. I know of Deutsche Bank, and if he's referring to Deutsche Bank, I do not have any information at this time about any threat from Deutsche Bank to Trinidad and Tobago's accounts.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, given that the file in the matter between the 9 men freed on the charge of murdering Vindra Naipal Kuhlman and the state has been found, will the Prime Minister inform this House whether the services of retired Justice Mr. Ralston Nelson and or Mr. Retired Justice Mr. Stanley John have been terminated by the state?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it is public knowledge that the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs has ordered an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the state's failure to file a defense in a civil action claiming malicious prosecution, which was brought by 9 former accused who were charged and subject to a criminal trial for the kidnapping and murder of businesswoman Vindra Naipal Kuhlman. On Saturday, the 11th of February 2023, lead investigator Mr. Justice Stanley John, retired, delivered a public statement informing the population of the terms of reference which govern the said investigation. The member is informed that the question posed falls well within the terms of reference, which includes investigating the reappearance of the file and therefore is within the remit of the investigative team.
Member for Couva South.
Prime Minister, are you in a position to inform this House as it relates to the terms and conditions that the retired justices were engaged by the state?
Member, having regard to the initial question asked and the answers, I rule that out of order. Member for Couva South.
Prime Minister, given that the Office of the Attorney General houses very important and sensitive files as it relates to cases before the judicial system in Trinidad and Tobago, are you in a position as the head of the government to inform this House if the loopholes which led to the disappearance of this file have been identified?
Member, given the question originally asked and the answers given thus far, I rule that question out of order. Member for Carnival East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 5, Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister explain to the House why the National Carnival Commission has not received the $147 million in funding from the government as reported by the chairman of the NCC?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, on February 16, 2023, the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and the Arts issued a press release in light of misleading reports in the media on funding for Carnival 2023 by the NCC. In that press release, the minister clarified the issue as follows. As of Thursday, 9th February 23, the NCC, through several requests, had received funding in the amount of approximately $17 million. Late on Friday, 10th February 2023, just 1 week before the Carnival period, the NCC made a further request for a further $83 million, which included, among others, transfers to Carnival bodies of 15.3 million, and grants to regional bodies of 6.173 million. This request was promptly submitted by the ministry to the Ministry of Finance that same afternoon, whose officers have been working throughout the weekend to ensure that this very late request for funding by the NCC was processed. There were errors in the submission from the NCC, and following the receipt of further supporting documentation and amendments, which were submitted to the Ministry of Finance on Monday, 13 February 2023, the Ministry of Finance approved the release of $83 million on Thursday, the 16th of February 2023, within 3 days of receiving the required documentation. It should be noted, Madam Speaker, that the Ministry of Tourism and Culture and the Arts has continued to work with the NCC since the passage of the Appropriations Bill in October 2023, that is, for the last 4 months, to ensure that resources are made available for the hosting of the successful return of Carnival 2023. However, this is dependent on timely application for funding by the NCC. It is hoped that future requests for funding will be made in a far more efficient manner.
Carney East.
Prime Minister, given reports by Dr. Alan Sami, Mayor Faik Mohammed, and Mayor Kagne Casimir that no funding was received in their corporations up to the 15th of February, what steps will your government take to ensure the equitable distribution of funds to local government bodies for future Carnival celebrations?
Member, having regard to the original question asked and the answers given thus far, I rule that question out of order. Member for Carney East.
Prime Minister, can you give the House the commitment that local government bodies will receive their Carnival subventions well before the Carnival weekend in 2024?
Member, again, having regard to the original question asked and the answers given, I rule that question out of order. Member for Naparima.
Madam Speaker, Honorable Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister inform the House why Trinidad and Tobago is unable to come off the Tier 2 watch list rating in the United States trafficking in persons report?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to actively work with the government of the United States on improving its ratings on the United States trafficking in persons report. And in fact, the United States is helping in the hiring of specific consultants to assist. One of the biggest issues currently is the lack of convictions, which is not under the government's control. The government continues to provide resources to the judiciary, the DPP, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to assist in this regard. Madam Speaker, this issue started with respect to issues of lack of legislation. We did in fact put the legislation in place. Then it was queried about charges, and then it was shown that persons have been charged. Now it has shifted to an absence of convictions. Well, then that is not in the government's remit, but we have come a long way and we are working towards closing the loop.
Prime Minister, the July 19, 2022 U.S. trafficking in persons report indicated that our country maintained its position on the Tier 2 watch list, in part because, and I quote, it did not take action against senior government officials alleged in 2020 to be involved in human trafficking. End of quote. Would the Prime Minister state whether he's aware of this information? Secondly, what action is being taken?
Well, it's only one question you're allowed as a supplementary.
One question will be, what action is being taken in respect of this allegation by the U.S. State Department?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we did hear that allegation, and when we investigated it, we discovered it was referring to current members of Parliament, none of which is on the government side. So my colleague might be able to help me in finding out who they were talking about.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister, we just lost the end of your response.
Yes, I was saying, Madam Speaker, that we did hear that statement and we investigated and discovered that they were not talking about people on the government side. And therefore, I was saying that maybe the member could help us to identify who exactly these assertions were aimed at.
Member for Naparimo.
Minister, for the obfuscation, but why has no action been taken, whichever side it came from?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, action against persons who commit crime is a matter for the police. If the member is calling on the police to investigate his colleague, then he doesn't need me to get involved in that.
Member for Naparimo.
Aware that under the Constitution, the government is responsible for overall control and policy of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, that might be so, but the government, and by the government I mean the cabinet and the executive, has no role in determining who is prosecuted. That is a matter for the police. And the member knows that. So if he wants to go after his colleague, let him do so without trying to get the government involved. If that allegation has substance by evidence, that's a police matter. And if the member is so excited to go after his colleague, let him go so alone. He cannot invite the government into that. The government does not determine who the police go after or who the police arrest for any crime, not the least of which human trafficking and the running of brothels.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister indicate the specific date on which the national debate and/or consultation on the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago will be held?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, we are finalizing those dates now and in discussion with my CARICOM colleagues. We are working with respect to the 17th and 18th of April, Monday and Tuesday, 17th and 18th of April.
Couva North.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, can the Prime Minister state why has the government agreed to host a regional symposium on crime and set dates for it before putting the immediate needs of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago first?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it is precisely because we are putting the needs of the people of Trinidad and Tobago first why we have agreed to have common cause with our colleagues in CARICOM who are facing the same issues and who are very excited to work alongside us so we can find regional responses. For example, the whole question of the inflow of small arms and assault weapons into our territories, we could speak more loudly and more effectively as CARICOM to the United States as against speaking as individual countries like St. Kitts and Trinidad and Tobago. So we are having a regional effort. And I cannot for the life of me understand why a member of parliament in Trinidad and Tobago would see a CARICOM effort on a matter of this nature in particular as not being in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is precisely because it's in their interest why we are driving this whole question of violent crime, which is, there's an upsurge in the region, Trinidad and Tobago being no exception. And we are aiming to work at it with respect to all of our various experiences and put our various resources to bear, not the least of which is a solid CARICOM front to the source of the arms that come into our countries.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, for absolute clarity, are you saying that the local crime consultation has now been fused with the CARICOM Symposium on Crime in April, and it is really one and the same event?
Prime Minister.
Yes, to a certain extent it is, because Trinidad and Tobago was prepared to go it alone in having a national consultation. But at the heads of government meeting, it was found that it is better. And in fact, we did have plans to host a similar meeting in Barbados in 2019. But with the coming of COVID, that didn't materialize. And if I may mention that way back in 2012, the OAS had hired a consultant to look at this matter for the benefit of the regional governments. So what we have done here is resurrected it in that way, and we are going to tap into all the resources available to confront this issue.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, will the Prime Minister provide an update on the government's mandate to table legislation in Parliament to regulate PH taxi drivers?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, there is a draft cabinet note being prepared and is for review by the cabinet. This matter is being pursued by and through the Ministry of Works and Transport, and it eventually will end with some sort of legislative response.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, can the Prime Minister state whether he is satisfied with the inordinate length of time taken by his administration to have that draft policy brought to the Parliament?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it is common knowledge that legislation evolves after some period of gestation, which involves consultation. It involves the crafting of certain documentation and ensuring that the legislation is fit for purpose. And this usually takes time, and that's what's going on, Madam Speaker.
North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, in light of the 4 fishermen who went missing at sea a few days ago, will the Prime Minister indicate whether he is satisfied with the current resourcing of the southern branch of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard presently has a small craft which is stationed at San Fernando, and this vessel conducts periodic patrols in the area. Additionally, frequent patrols are conducted along the south coast of Trinidad by the Austral Cape-class vessel, the CG-42, TTS Scarborough, in response to the illegal activities of narcotics smuggling and the unauthorized movement of foreign nationals into Trinidad and Tobago. CG-42 was able to conduct a search for the missing fishermen after receiving the report. The search area extended from Galeota to the Carcass, and then TTCG was able to coordinate with the Venezuelan Coast Guard to conduct searches within their territorial waters.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. Can the Prime Minister indicate the current operational status of the vessels allocated to the coastal and riverine unit servicing the south area of the country?
Member for Couva North. I rule that question out of order having regard to what has been asked and what has been answered. Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the Prime Minister state whether he intends to take action given the huge profits being declared by the banking sector and alleged predatory practices against customers regarding exorbitant bank fees?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, for someone who spends a lot of his time talking about how the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has collapsed, that is a mantra of the member for Naparima and others. I'm surprised to hear him now talking about huge profits at the banks. But allow me to remind the member, Madam Speaker, that the majority of banks in Trinidad and Tobago are publicly traded companies with local shareholders. Example, the FCB, Republic Bank, and Scotiabank. So local shareholders in our population benefit via dividends and increased share values. Also, this government created the NIF, Madam Speaker, which has the largest shareholding in Republic Bank, with over 7,000 bondholders benefiting from profits shared via dividends. The NIB, which pays pensions and other benefits to a broad cross-section of people in this country, many of whom rely almost solely on these payments. The NIB is also a significant shareholder in all major banks. So the benefactors of NIB also benefit via payments of pensions and other benefits. And lastly, Madam Speaker, I want to point out to my colleague in the context of this question that this PNM government increased the taxation on banks to 35% to tax what he calls the higher profits.
For Naparima.
I could ask, Madam Speaker, is the Prime Minister prepared to follow his Barbadian colleague, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who instructed Central Bank Governor Haynes to investigate the issue of bank fees, which are said to be among the factors driving the rising costs in that country? Is she more concerned about the cost to consumers?
This is not for statements.
Yeah.
This is for a supplemental question.
Barbadian colleague in this regard in talking to the bank.
Prime Minister.
Speaker, once again, I would advise my colleague from Naparima that if he's more comfortable in Barbados, he could go there, you know. Because what affects Trinidad and Tobago or Barbados, they're not the same thing. I don't know the basis on which the Prime Minister of Barbados is taking that position. But what I do know is that what I've outlined here for our government's treatment of our situation is not replicated in Barbados. So I can't understand how a member of parliament would get up in here and tell me I must follow another prime minister in another country. Our circumstances. And our circumstances determine that the government's increase in taxation to 35% was what the best action we could have taken in Trinidad and Tobago. And we've done that. And when we look at the shareholding, I just mentioned who are the beneficiaries of these profits. So, Madam Speaker, I would simply like to ask my colleague to look and learn rather than copy and follow.
Honourable members, the time for Prime Ministerial questions. Honourable members, the time for Prime Ministerial questions is now spent.
Urgent questions, questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are two questions for oral response, and we'll be answering both. There is one question for written response, and we're asking for a 2-week deferral, Madam Speaker.
Member for Naparima.
Madam Speaker, question number 89 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, public school places in Trinidad and Tobago are reserved primarily for Trinidad and Tobago citizens. However, the law provides for foreign nationals to access schooling through application for a student permit by well-established guidelines. A valid Trinidad and Tobago passport or certificate of immigration status is required. Student permits are, by law, only granted where no local student has been displaced and there is adequate accommodation for the foreign student at the school. Once these requirements are met, foreign students can and do access public school places. If there are any legislative changes to these requirements, the Ministry of Education will adjust its admission policies accordingly.
Member for Naparima.
Is the Minister aware that there are children of migrants who are citizens, therefore born in Trinidad, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and are being denied access to early childhood care centers?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that is being denied access, that information certainly can be provided to the Ministry of Education and appropriate action will be taken.
Member for Naparima.
Question number 90 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Reform Hindu Primary School, Reform ECCE Center, and Ben Lomond ECCE Center are among 115 projects comprising 21 secondary, 32 primary, and 62 ECCE centers that remained in an incomplete state as of 2015. Of these 115, active construction only commenced on 76, while the remaining 39 had only reached design stage. By way of loan financing facilitated by the Ministry of Finance, approximately $450 million has been spent on the construction/completion and outfitting of 15 of these schools. A further loan of $267 million has been secured to complete the construction of a further 7 of these schools. Though the Reform Hindu Primary School, Reform ECCE Center, and Ben Lamont ECCE Center are not among the 7, their completion is seen as critical, and therefore these priority projects will be addressed as soon as possible. In this regard, firm completion dates for these facilities cannot be provided at this time.
Member for Oakwood East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Minister, I'm so happy that you have the figures in front of you. Could you indicate the status for the completion of the Ramai Trace Hindu School, please?
Member, again, I rule that out of order. Yes, I know you could try, and I will rule. Member for Naparima.
Minister satisfied that the citizens of Naparima will not feel discriminated against when I cannot give them a date, for the completion of any of these schools.
Member, I rule that question out of order.
Statement by ministers.
Leader of the House.
Again, I thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 126, and with your leave, there has been agreement to allow the Minister of Finance to speak until the conclusion of his statement.
Whip. The Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the members opposite for that generous approval. I have been authorized by the Cabinet to make the following statement, and I thank you and members for the opportunity to deliver it. A statement on the 3-year strategic plan for the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority for the period 2023 to 2025, which has been laid in this House, in accordance with the provision of Section 30 of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Act, number 17 of 2021, and the approval of Cabinet. The decision to establish the TTRA was driven by the need to address deficiencies in the current system stemming from limitations within the public service. Long-standing deficiencies in the system have been identified and documented in feasibility and performance reports dating back as early as 2002. Subsequent to the legislative process and passage of the TTRA Bill 2021 in both houses, the TTRA Act 2021 was assented to by Her Excellency the President of Trinidad and Tobago on December the 23rd, 2021. The Act enables the TTRA to function according to its mandate, but through a hybrid system, whereby the Enforcement Division will still be guided by the Public Service Commission. Through benchmarking against several models, the structure chosen for the TTRA combines the functions of 2 divisions of the Ministry of Finance, namely the Inland Revenue Division and the Customs and Excise Division. As one revenue collecting agency, there will be several benefits and synergies, including cost efficiencies, data sharing, and improved risk mitigation frameworks. The Inland Revenue Division currently faces challenges that impact the customer, the operations of the organization, and the level of tax collection within the country. Deficiencies in the system damage the social contract between the citizen and the collection agency and contribute to the trust deficit leading to non-compliance. The TTRA has set out several ways in which these challenges can be mitigated to ultimately enhance the customer experience, to drive voluntary compliance, and the employee experience to drive efficiencies. The Custom and Excise Division's internal plan points and challenges give way to a longer and inconsistent revenue collection methodology and higher prices for imports due to additional fees charged that do not form part of the government's tax revenue. The TTRA aims to provide a more seamless process to customers and create an environment focused on trust and transparency. By legal notice number 60, dated March 14, 2022, the TTRA Act was partially proclaimed to provide for the appointment of the Board of Management, the recruitment of staff, and other matters. In June 2022, the Board of Management of the TTRA was appointed, and pursuant to the legislative requirement, as per Section 30 of the TTRA Act, in December 2022, the Board submitted the TTRA's first strategic 3-year plan for the period 2023-2025, inclusive of a 3-year roadmap and detailed operational plan for year 1. I now turn to the main points. I wish to emphasize the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority was established in 2021 by an Act of Parliament with an estimated 2017 domestic tax gap of up to $10 billion. The government, through the TTRA, is actively seeking to address this fiscal vulnerability and close the tax gap by improving the efficiency and efficacy of the country's revenue collection. In order to stimulate economic growth and development, the government needs sustainable sources of financing for social programs and government investments, which calls for strengthened revenue administration, inclusive of effective trade facilitation and border control. The most cost-effective systems for collecting revenues are those that encourage customers to meet their obligations voluntarily, leaving authorities to concentrate their efforts on those customers who do not comply. A robust and effective system would prevent further leakages in revenue collection, thereby providing additional funding to maximize public services and provide an enriched quality of life for all throughout Trinidad and Tobago. To promote transparency, the TTRA board has highlighted in their strategic plan key discussion points of the Act, which will be featured in the communication to future staff and the wider public as an education-forward strategy to create buy-in and comfort around the legal framework of the TTRA. The strategic plan seeks to offer a smooth merger and transition for the two organizations and mitigate the anticipated challenges that may be faced. The salient aspects of the strategy being presented are as follows. At an overarching level, the TTRA will achieve its strategic objectives and aim to meet its targets through execution of its initiatives over the next 3 years, 2023 to 2025, as follows. Year 1, integrate and retain. Year 2, transition. Year 3, transform and grow. The TTRA's aim is to retain its tax collection levels in the first year, followed by a 1% and 3% increase in the tax to GDP ratio in years 2 and 3, respectively.
Members, the buzz is growing.
Right. The board will execute its strategy in a manner that does not unduly disrupt trade or economic development by imposing onerous and unnecessary administrative tasks on taxpayers, traders, and businesses. They will carry out their responsibilities in a manner guided by their core values: equity, trust, transparency, accountability, responsiveness, innovation, and risk intelligence, and governed by their guiding principles. Their vision is to be a trusted and fair revenue administration that acts with integrity and transparency, committed to closing the tax gap and to effective trade facilitation through voluntary compliance, innovative solutions, enhanced citizens' experience, and an empowered workforce. Strategic Objective 1 is to establish a high-performing and ethical workforce that is instilled with a sense of purpose, pride, and empowered to achieve the objectives of the TTRA, including to recruit and retain suitable resources for the TTRA for the transition period and beyond, to revisit and redefine the enforcement function to ensure greater alignment with the proposed structure. 3, to manage the transition of existing Inland Revenue Department, Inland Revenue Division, and Customs and Excise Division employees to support the operationalization of the TTRA in accordance with the provision of the Act. 4, to develop an integration and transition management strategy. 5, to establish a TTRA organizational culture. 6, promote business continuity through the transition phase and beyond. 7, define a continuous learning and training program for all levels of staff. 8, promote and assess employee engagement. And 9, optimize the workforce structure for the efficient delivery of the TTRA's services. The second strategic objective, to educate taxpayers effectively and make it simple for them to comply with their obligations by 1, ensuring a consistent application of the laws by the TTRA audit and enforcement staff in accordance with the institution's interpretation of the law. 2, to develop clear and simple to use revenue services that allow customers to easily file their tax returns and pay duties, thereby encouraging voluntary compliance. The third strategic objective, to create an innovative and data-driven organization that will drive greater compliance. And the fourth objective, to modernize systems to enhance and streamline our online services by developing an IT blueprint for the TTRA, detailing intended IT landscape, including technology components, and to define key IT rules. 2, to optimize existing systems. 3, to develop a data strategy to guide the pertinent data to be collected, secured, managed, and used to drive actionable insights around identification of suspicious behavior, non-compliance, and accurate revenue collection. 4, to actively implement simple innovations which may have significant positive implications on voluntary compliance. 5, to establish cyber security programs to protect the TTRA from cyber threats and data breaches. And 6, to improve the evaluation process for customs through innovation. The fifth objective, to modernize revenue collection systems and processes to drive efficiency, improve stakeholder experience, and detect and reduce non-compliance by reviewing, validating, and updating existing processes as necessary, converting processes into new system requirements for RFP purposes, defining service delivery channels, reviewing and refining legislation as necessary, establishing an enterprise risk management framework, optimizing TTRA corporate governance framework, developing an internal audit plan, developing a policy framework to promote the use of SOPs, which will improve the ease of doing business, standing operating procedures, to optimize and automate key processes, to develop mitigation practices against non-compliance, to improve the enforcement arm of customs and excise by developing clear guidelines to regulate transit sheds owned and operated by the private sector, and to initiate the process to further implement the common reporting standards to support the automatic exchange of information. The sixth objective, to create the public trust and confidence in the revenue administration system by developing and finalizing detailed communication plans across all media types to actively inform all stakeholders of the TTRA formation building trust through transparency and visibility. 2, for a formal launch of the TTRA. 3, to develop long-term communication plans to update stakeholders on incremental improvements and demonstrate transparency. And finally, to develop and launch a new TTRA website and withdrawal of the Customs and Excise Division and Inland Revenue Division individual websites so as to avoid confusion to citizens and the trade community. Some key initiatives that are expected to be executed in the first year include detailed review of the existing legislation, including that which currently governs the Inland Revenue Division and Customs and Excise Division, to obtain clarity around what the TTRA is and is not responsible for within the capacity of the TTRA Revenue Authority Act. Consistent application of the laws by the TTRA audit and enforcement staff, review and updating of existing work rules and promotion of the use of standard operating procedures to ensure consistency and the ease of doing business, development of an integration and transition management strategy, recruitment of suitable resources to support the transition to the TTRA, a dedicated transition team steering committee to ensure the seamless integration of existing divisions, recruitment of key resources and leadership roles for the authority, assessment of HR requirements inclusive of new skills that may need to be acquired to facilitate a digitized revenue administration, process re-engineering exercise with key representatives of the two divisions, which will promote buy-in and improve the success rate, develop a baseline for key metrics. Sample metrics are included at this point in time in the plan as a guide. Execution of an integrated communications and PR strategic plan that will deliver influential messaging and create desired perception of the TTRA so as to obtain buy-in from key stakeholders and the general public, and finally launch of the new TTRA website. In year 2, some of the primary objectives will be clear and simple to use revenue services for all, inclusive of payment of tax and duties. Greater online and digital channel options through which customers can transact and interact. Education as a first approach to promote awareness on customer obligations. Development of clear guidelines to regulate and ensure compliance of transit sheds owned and operated by the private sector. Facilitate efficient supply chain for exporters and importers. Development of data strategy and an establishment of centers of excellence. Recruitment of persons with pertinent analytical skills. Establishment of other centers of excellence dedicated to specific customer segmentation, such as oil and gas, large corporates, small and medium enterprises, etc. Implementation of new digital platforms as identified. Reduction in manual processes. Focus on establishing a risk-intelligent culture that embodies all of the TTRA core values. Continuous rollout of communication strategy to maintain buy-in. In year 3, the final year of the plan, some of the objectives will be strengthening of customer compliance and enforcement, exploration of the use of advanced data modeling, artificial intelligence, utilization of advanced analytics to better segment tax cohorts, utilization of application programming interfaces to exchange taxpayer data seamlessly, development of mitigation strategies to address or reduce the presence of the shadow economy within Trinidad and Tobago, improvement of the valuation process for customs, introduction of other tools and innovations to enhance customs operations, improvement of the conditions of existing substandard customs office accommodation, and transparency communicate compliance issues. The successful achievement of the TTRA's strategic objectives requires that the organizational structure provides the framework upon which the initiatives and objectives can be based. The focus will be placed on performing the authority's main responsibility of revenue collection and administration through technical services and the enforcement division. In recent years, I'm speaking now about digital transformation. In recent years, tax administrators globally have assumed new and evolving roles with ingenuity and skill. Through the integration of digital platforms and forming partnerships, the digital transformation has been catalyzed. Digital transformation will play an essential role in supporting the TTRA in addressing the challenges that arise in tax administration. Due to the central position of tax authorities in global interactions, digital payment and data are becoming increasingly significant. These changes are raising security and privacy questions and challenging the traditional role of tax authorities. As such, organizations are being required to innovate and adapt. And let me go now to the final set of objectives. Firstly, using a customer-first approach. The burden of filing accurate tax returns typically falls on the taxpayer. However, oftentimes individuals struggle to understand, document, and process their tax liabilities. Many tax administrators have already made substantial progress in designing services around the customer and have already achieved a 100% e-filing rate. Secondly, applying advanced analytics and behavioral incentives. Tax authorities are already using advanced data modeling, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. This can help authorities personalize services further by better segmenting tax cohorts, allowing tax collectors to give more empathetic support to lower income households and struggling businesses, making sure they get their refunds first, giving them more notice of assessments, and deferring payment schedules. Thirdly, using real-time data to improve compliance and mobilize revenue. Many leading tax authorities use an application programming interface to exchange tax data. For example, under the UK's Making Tax Digital framework, more than 1 million businesses have used API interfaces to supply business data directly to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. The next evolution will be to upgrade cybersecurity so that adopting cloud technologies becomes cost-effective, scalable, and secure. Fourthly, enhancing technology with the right digital skills and ways of working. The pandemic revealed the challenges that tax administrations face in digital transformation. By using advanced digital technologies alongside skilled tax professionals, tax authorities can give taxpayers tailored support, including quicker access to refunds. Fifthly, harnessing tax data to improve economic, social, and government policy. Digital technologies can clearly revolutionize the taxpayer experience and make it simpler to comply. Tax and administrations can also help governments improve economic and fiscal policy. Looking ahead, tax administrations can also share the data with each other and wider government to achieve objectives, identifying issues such as forced labor in supply chains. In summary, revenue administrations around the world have invested significantly in innovative solutions to address their challenges and improve revenue collection, compliance, and operations within their jurisdiction. All of this is in the strategic plan. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Oropouche West.
Madam Speaker, I rise on the basis of Standing Order 24.4. The Minister's entire presentation was premised on the TTRA strat plan. One of the objectives in year one is for the TTRA to determine what it is responsible for and not responsible for, according to the Minister. How realistic, Minister, is then this strat plan if it is based on the absence of this critical information?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is some confusion among members opposite as to the role and function of the TTRA. And what the TTRA intends to do is to clarify, elucidate, and educate members of the opposition and others of similar mind as to the role and function of the TTRA, which requires a detailed education on what the TTRA can do and what it cannot do, what it should do and what it should not do.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
So before we begin, I just want to remind members of the provisions of Standing Orders 53, particularly E, F, and G. Honourable members, the debate on the following motion, which was in progress when the House adjourned on Friday, November 25th, 2022, will be resumed. Be it resolved that this House condemn the government for its failure to effectively address the unacceptable and serious crime level affecting law-abiding citizens. The members who have already contributed to this debate will be the member for Barataria San Juan, the member for Laventille West, the member for Superior, the member for La Horquetta Talparo, the member for Chaguanas West, who now has 14 minutes of original speaking time left. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for, again, the opportunity to continue in this very important motion which has been brought by the member for Barataria Sawan. Madam Speaker, on the last occasion when this private motion first came in debate, the first session, that was the 25th of November 2022. And Madam Speaker, just for the record, I think I would have gotten as far as my rebuttal of the previous speaker, so that member for La Hoqueta Talparo, if I remember correctly. Madam Speaker, today, as I get into the substance of the motion, Madam Speaker, I want to start by treating with some of the salient points which form the substratum of this motion. And I think it is clear that we have established, and it is something that I need not get into in any further detail, that it is the duty and the responsibility of the government to ensure the safety and security of the citizenry. Some of the points which have been carefully articulated as drafted in this motion by member for Barataria Sawan, and he has identified certain areas which I will be touching upon today. The government has failed in its management of the organs responsible for national security. The government has been unable to provide for safety and security of the citizens, the breakdown in the criminal justice system, an accompanying rise in the murder toll. Madam Speaker, the government has failed to present clear anti-crime plans. We have had, for 7 years, neglect in certain areas, such as education, training opportunities, etc. Essentially, we have a total breakdown of the social safety net. And, Madam Speaker, also what has been touched upon in this motion is businesses have been negatively affected by high crime levels. And taking all of these factors into account, we are now asking the House to condemn the government for its failure to effectively address the unacceptable serious crime levels. Madam Speaker, before I get into how it is we will premise that this PNM government is failing everyone, and taking it in the context of this private motion, Madam Speaker, I first want to start by saying that, Madam Speaker, I am a proud citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam Speaker, why I make that point is that it gives me no pleasure to stand here today to reference the state of spiraling crime in our beloved Twin Island Republic as I continue this debate today. However, Madam Speaker, as a patriot, as a representative of the people of Chaguanas West, as well as a husband, being a husband and a father, it is my duty, Madam Speaker, to contribute to the debate in the following terms, Madam Speaker. You see, because crime affects us all. Far too often, Madam Speaker, when this government is challenged on their record by the opposition and others in the society, they respond by saying that we want the government to fail. Indeed, Madam Speaker, the Minister of National Security said that he felt that only half of the society wanted him to succeed. I want to say, Madam Speaker, that when this government fails on crime, they are failing us all, regardless of your political party, regardless of your race or your religion. We all suffer when crime is rampant. And right now, Madam Speaker, when we look at the state of the country, every single person in this country will tell you
that crime is completely out of control. So before members of those opposite accuse me of wanting them to fail, let me say, Madam Speaker, I do not want my children to be victims of crime any more than I would want children of the members opposite to be victims of crime. We all live in this society, and right now, we are all 1.3 plus million of us living in fear. But Madam Speaker, it comes down to the fact that when we take what is happening in our society, the PNM is not a real government, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, recently, the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, he got angry with members of the public for using the expression, Trinidad is not a real place. The Prime Minister was so mad, he suggested that those of us, or the citizenry, who use that phrase could go to Ukraine. Well, Madam Speaker, I looked up some of the statistics, and according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Global Study on Homicide, the murder rate in Trinidad and Tobago in 2020 was 28.2 per 100,000 population. And on the other hand, Madam Speaker, the murder rate in Ukraine in 2020 was 5.5 per 100,000 population, according to the UN ODC report. So therefore, Madam Speaker, in 2020, what we had was that Trinidad and Tobago had a significantly higher murder rate than Ukraine. So let me put that in the record, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity, in as much as we are in this particular debate, but I would just veer off slightly, Madam Speaker, to quickly say on the record that we are 1 year ahead since the commencement of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I would want to say on the record that I know for all of us, we wish peace at this point in time to that ongoing conflict. But Madam Speaker, returning to the motion at hand, Madam Speaker, people are so fed up of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, they just might be willing to go to the ongoing war in Ukraine just to get away from this failing government. Because for hundreds of thousands of people, Trinidad and Tobago already feels like a war zone. Madam Speaker, but of course, when people say that Trinidad is not a real place, Madam Speaker, humbly, I do not think that they mean that literally. They are also not being unpatriotic, Madam Speaker. Rather, they are utilizing irony to describe the almost surreal absurdity of a situation. Every single well-known artist in Trinidad and Tobago, from Derek Walcott to V.S. Naipaul, to the great Calypsonian Lord Invader, have utilized these expressions of irony and sarcasm to describe life in Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes we say it is pecan. This is what Kaiso is famous for. We just came out of Carnival. But we know if it's one thing this thin-skinned government is famous for, is that they can't take pecan or criticism or scrutiny. They are unable to take scrutiny of any kind. Madam Speaker, just as an example, when you have a Minister of National Security who can go on TV and tell the citizens of this nation that it is not his job to make them feel safe as citizens, then the citizenry have a right to say that Trinidad is not a real place. When a Minister of National Security can watch a video of school children cowering in fear because gangs are shooting at each other outside and tell the country that basically the children were overreacting because the gunfire was some 200 feet away, then the citizens have a right yet again to say that Trinidad is not a real place. Madam Speaker, when on Carnival Day, the day that requires careful attention and planning by our protective services, the Minister of National Security can abandon his post and go fetting on the road, then citizens have a right to say that Trinidad is not a real place. Madam Speaker, when, and I will use this as the last example, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes left of your original speaking time. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your contribution if you so wish.
Madam Speaker, may I have the additional time, please?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my last example. Madam Speaker, when the Minister of National Security can say that we have a safe carnival after a weekend which saw 9 murders, multiple robbers, the shooting of a tourist, and various carjackings, then again, Madam Speaker, I am saying on behalf of the citizenry, we all have a right to say that Trinidad is not a real place. Personally, Madam Speaker, I think that Trinidad and Tobago is a real place. Unfortunately, the problem we face is that those on that side are not a real government. Madam Speaker, I turn to the fact that crime is not a problem for this government. Madam Speaker, everyone in our nation is asking one major question. Why is it that every time you have a PNM government, that violent crime goes completely out of control? Well, Madam Speaker, crime may be a complex problem, but there is a simple answer to that question. And the answer to that question is that the PNM doesn't see crime as a problem. And let me explain what I mean by that, Madam Speaker. You see, Madam Speaker, it is universally accepted that there are some factors which help reduce and eliminate crime. These factors, Madam Speaker, include promoting education, facilitating economic growth, and creating jobs, access to quality health care, confidence in the public justice system. All of these factors, Madam Speaker, that I have just mentioned have either been eroded or collapsed under this Rowley-led PNM government. Madam Speaker, let me get into some of the reports to make this point. According to a report in the Trinidad Guardian, April 2021, Minister of Education, the Honorable Nyan Gadsby Dolly, said that 2,000 children had fallen out of the school system. 2 years later, Madam Speaker, we have no idea what has happened to these children, and there appears to be no concern by this government to find out. A government, Madam Speaker, that does not care about the education of our children does not care about solving crime. Madam Speaker, I go to another newspaper report in the Trinidad Guardian on August 10, 2021. It says 6,000 small and medium-sized businesses have shut their doors permanently. That's 6,000 businesses, Madam Speaker, each with workers and families. If people cannot find decent paying jobs, how can they take care of themselves and their families? Madam Speaker, rampant joblessness is now being met with the added burdens of rising food prices, higher electricity rates, and of course, unnecessary, at this time, property taxes. Madam Speaker, these are the things. It is a recipe for social upheaval. When people become desperate, they will resort to desperate means. Madam Speaker, I make the point yet again. A government that does not care, Madam Speaker, when hardworking men and women become jobless and hopeless, is a government that does not care about solving crime. Madam Speaker, when you have, and I reference this in the context of in the motion, we are talking about a corresponding breakdown in the criminal justice system. We must take that for what it is. And inherent in that is the confidence which people have, we repose as a citizenry in the criminal justice system. But when an attorney general can be found in a court of law to have misrepresented facts which is known personally to him and be disqualified by that court of law and yet still sit in the office of the attorney general, then what kind of confidence can ordinary men and women have in our justice system? Madam Speaker, the point I want to make, and I will not dwell on that too much, a government that can accept the excuse that a file went missing in a major criminal case is a government that does not have a handle on the criminal justice system and does not care about crime. Madam Speaker, this is why crime always goes up, and I reference where I started off. This is why crime always goes up. And as I said, when the PNM is in power, because when they are in power, every metric, every human measuring of the quality of life goes down. Madam Speaker, I turn to crime as a public health crisis. Madam Speaker, a few months ago, the Honorable Prime Minister, who, from what I saw in the reports, Madam Speaker, I am glad that the Honorable Prime Minister joined us virtually today for Prime Minister questions, but from the reports, this may be the 4th time he has contracted COVID, and I want to wish on the record that there's a speedy recovery, because we want to have the head of the National Security Council and the cabinet. We want to have him functioning. We need to get a grapple on this crime situation. Madam Speaker, I don't really care to veer off, but that little outburst from the Honorable Minister of National Security, you see, that is the problem. One of the major problems is that if we are not breaking records with respect to how much times we can contract COVID, we are breaking records in terms of the crime statistics. What records of deaths, murder toll, every year, that is what is happening. So I think that is what would cause an outburst. Madam Speaker, I quickly return to crime as a public health crisis. A few months ago, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister unveiled his latest plan to treat violent crime as a public health emergency. And like all of the Prime Minister's plans, Madam Speaker, we have not heard or seen anything else on it since then. We do know that the Prime Minister created a special committee in July 2022, which he tasked with developing a plan to deal with crime. And Madam Speaker, according to AZP News, online news forum of July 18, 2022, an online article titled, and I quote the title, "Committee to Deal with Crime, Rowley." Madam Speaker, that is the title, and I quote from the article itself, Madam Speaker. The intention is to develop a national plan of action with a wide tapestry of action, and international funding may be sought. Dr. Rowley said, and the online news is quoting Dr. Rowley, that plan of action would be driven by a public health approach. We will identify the causes and the risk factors. We will design a response, and we will test the interventions that we are going to make. And we will implement and scale up effective interventions and support continuous evaluation. The objective, I continue with the quotation, the objective here is to enter the youth population at various levels and to begin a line of education which should steer people away from participation or being desensitized by crime and criminal activity. If done effectively, it would ensure a better citizenry, the Prime Minister said, and that is the extract of that online news forum. I am presuming, Madam Speaker, that this committee will conduct its work under the concept of treating crime as a public health crisis. But so far, Madam Speaker, we have heard nothing from this committee. I am therefore puzzled by how this committee is doing their work. Are they meeting with civil society? Are they meeting with law enforcement? Are they meeting with experts on reducing gang activity, narco trafficking, or prisoner reform and rehabilitation? How can a national plan, Madam Speaker, how can a national plan to deal with crime be crafted without any input from the nation it is supposed to serve? I have no objection, Madam Speaker, with treating crime as a public health emergency. But treating a public emergency requires science, and science is built on evidence. To treat crime and violence as we treat public health, we therefore need data. We need reliable data on why so many of our young people are willing to join gangs. We need data on illicit activities taking place at our ports of entry. We need data on how violence in schools affects our young people. We need data on the public perception and confidence in our justice system. The idea then, Madam Speaker, is not just to view violence as a disease. The idea is that we should be using facts and evidence to find solutions to reality-based problems. This is the basis of all sound policy making, and it should make one wonder, Madam Speaker, why the government needed why the government needed to suddenly treat the crime as a disease before adopting this mindset. Madam Speaker, I want to reference something which is there on the history books. The doctors in the Middle Ages, Madam Speaker, used to treat the plague by using leeches. That's what they thought effective treatment for diseases was back then. And if this government in 2023, Madam Speaker, wants to treat crime as a health crisis but have no reliable data, then they are essentially trying to cure violent crime by administering leeches on the criminals and criminality. Madam Speaker, it just will not work. Madam Speaker, that being said, I look forward to the report by this special committee. I hope it will be presented to the public before the planned CARICOM meeting on crime in April of this year, 2023. I hope that this special committee doesn't end up, Madam Speaker, like the committee which the Honorable Prime Minister established after the Port of Spain riots. That committee which I'm referring to was headed by Anthony Watkins and was supposed to examine the causes of disquiet and dissatisfaction among disenfranchised communities. And Madam Speaker, yet again, as of yet, we have nothing from that committee. Madam Speaker, that being said, Madam Speaker, before I go into the other segment of my contribution, I want to say that when we take the context, the reality of the situation and the context of this lack of handle which the government has on crime, there is undoubtedly no other alternative but to condemn the government for its failure to effectively address the unacceptable and serious crime levels, which is what this motion is seeking, it is resolved to do. Madam Speaker, may I ask how much time I have again?
Your speaking time expires at 3:04:25.
Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, on the, if I may use the term loosely, originating session, which was on the 25th of November, and commencement of this debate occurred, there was an article which I found very interesting on that very date, which was published in the Daily Express, Friday, 25th November, 2022. And the title of this is 16 Days of Activism to End Violence Against Women, Girls. That is the title. And it is an article by Roberta Clark, the author who is the president of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I want to reference just certain paragraphs from this article in the context that even this motion, again, I must commend member for Barataria Sawan for bringing this motion. And in it, he has referenced the corresponding breakdown in the criminal justice system. Madam Speaker, what the article says, and I quote, "Why do women stay, many ask," and this, again, we are talking about violence against women. This is not straightforward. So in some relationships, you have violence against women, and why do they stay? Some victims do not even have the money to make a call to 800 SAVE. They do not have money to take a taxi to the police station. They may be financially dependent, if not for themselves, for their children. They live in fear that if they do find a way to make a report, that the abuser will find out and the reprisals will be deadly. This is not an unfounded fear, and this is, I'm quoting from the article. Many who leave do so at their own peril. Too often, we open the newspapers to read of women killed by men with whom they shared an intimate partnership and whom they sought to leave. The view of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence is that this is not the first question to ask. Rather, the question must be, what can we do to help? But who is we? Question mark. Most importantly, because many aspects of domestic violence are criminal offenses, the police are first responders. They must be well trained everywhere in Trinidad and Tobago to receive the reports and to do immediate and effective investigations. When this is not done, victims should have a way of accessing senior police management. Notwithstanding the improvements in policing, we still hear complaints of indifferent police responses. But the responses are not only for the police. Applications for protection orders must be fast-tracked. If the hearing of an application is delayed, there should be an alert within court administration that triggers a review and oversight of case management. And I quoted this, Madam Speaker, in the context of what is the reality in Trinidad and Tobago. We see too many instances of domestic violence, and it has become more extreme in terms of the harm being meted out to women in the society. And this article by Roberta Clark, President of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, I thought to be pertinent because she also references a problem in the justice system, which is something that the government ought to take on board. Madam Speaker, I want to say that crimes against women, crimes against children, they are all changing the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, in addressing, and as I said, it gives me no satisfaction to say it, but say it I must on behalf of constituents and, of course, the citizenry. There is no confidence, Madam Speaker, that justice is being meted out in a timely fashion and murderers will be put through the criminal justice system. Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, must once again join hands in solidarity against all those who dare to violate the daughters and children of this country. Madam Speaker, we cannot abide by the failing national security measures which have neither inspired confidence nor change. We cannot expect to do the same things over. We cannot expect to do the same old things and see different and better results. Madam Speaker, in the context, I want to join member for Barataria Sawan. I want to adopt and endorse the member for Siparia who also spoke on this important motion and brought a lot of clarity in terms of the direction in which we as a country should be heading and how the government should take a page out of when the honorable member of Siparia had led a government and brought down crime between 2010 and 2015. And I want to end by saying that it is time to demand that the morale of our mothers, our daughters, and our children be restored and given some guarantee that they can walk the streets, the malls, the shopping centers, the groceries without fear that it may be their last outing. Madam Speaker, I end by, again, adopting, endorsing, and I call upon members of this House that they support the resolution in this private motion and condemn the government for its failure to effectively address the unacceptable and serious crime level affecting law-abiding citizens. Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Member for Tobago East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for recognizing me. Madam Speaker, I first want to acknowledge some of the points made by the member for Shoguanas West. The member for Shoguanas West indicated that yes, indeed, we do have a high level of crime and violence in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's public concern in terms of safety and security. I acknowledge that, Madam Speaker. I think most persons in this honorable House would have experienced some form of violent act committed against them throughout their lifetime. I remember a couple of years ago, my house being broken into while I was in Trinidad on government business. I remember prior to that being at home and somebody changed my clothes and somebody peeping in my home. So we all, in some instance, would have experienced some form of crime, some form of violence in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is indeed a fact, that is the reality. Madam Speaker, I want to place on the record that even though many of us would have experienced some form of violence at some point in time in Trinidad and Tobago, there has been significant work done by this government to turn the trends around, to improve the quality of life of Trinbagonians and to bring about peace and safety and security for all citizens of this country. And I want to take this opportunity to commend the Honorable Prime Minister and members of the Cabinet who work assiduously to ensure that systems are in place, policies are in place, mechanisms are in place to ensure that all our citizens can live a life that is free from violence and chaos, notwithstanding what we may experience from time to time. Madam Speaker, I don't want to trivialize the issue of violence or cast blame on anyone. But before I go into the meat of my contribution, which would focus on gender-based violence, and indeed the last speaker would have mentioned instances of violence against women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago, I want to reiterate a point that I've been making ever since I've been a member of this honorable House. And that, Madam Speaker, is the fact that bringing about a crime-free Trinidad and Tobago, ensuring that we have a peaceful society, requires an all-of-society approach. It requires all hands on deck. It requires every citizen, every man, every woman, every boy, and every girl in Trinidad and Tobago, recognizing that he or she has a role to play and actively engaging in various processes to bring about this peaceful society that is required. Madam Speaker, I also want to stress how important it is for key institutions in this society to recognize the role that they would have to play to bring about a peaceful Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, as legislators, we have a duty to ensure that we create good laws and that we collaborate and that we enter into partnership and work together to create good laws and pass good laws for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. As an executive, it is our duty as an executive, as government ministers, to ensure that we develop policies and ensure that policies are indeed implemented. Madam Speaker, there's a role for the judiciary. The judiciary must ensure that the wheels of justice turn swiftly and surely so that persons do not become disenchanted, disillusioned. Madam Speaker, there's a role for the media to ensure that there is fair and responsible reporting on issues of crime and violence in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, there is indeed a role for the religious bodies and organizations in Trinidad and Tobago to reevaluate the messages that we communicate to our flock, that we reevaluate what we say to vulnerable men and women who come for guidance within the churches, the mandiris, the mosques. There's a role for every single institution. But Madam Speaker, as the member for Chaguanas West would have said, the role of the government is indeed critical. We are the ones who carry the burden of taking Trinidad and Tobago forward in this time. We have been elected, and this is our duty. I want to assure the people of Trinidad and Tobago that we are not shirking our responsibility. We are indeed working to put the various policies and programs in place to ensure that we bring about this peaceful, crime-free society that we all desire. Madam Speaker, in terms of violence against women and girls, I want to reference some of the information coming out from studies done in Trinidad and Tobago and studies done internationally. According to the UN Women, an estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, have been subject to intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lifetime. This accounts for 30% of women aged 15 and older. And according to the World Health Organization, this figure is higher at 35%. The issue of criminality against women and girls manifests itself in several ways in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2017, a women's health survey was commissioned by the IDB and revealed relatively high evidence of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse against women, both within relationships and also non-partners. The data compiled by the Crime and Problem Analysis Unit indicated that there was a 17% increase in reports of domestic violence over the period of 2020 to 2022. However, although we would have seen an increase in the reports of instances of domestic violence, we would have also seen a downward trend in terms of number of persons who would have died in instances related to domestic violence for that same period. Madam Speaker, domestic violence in any form has serious consequences for all of us in this country. It leads to negative health outcomes, depression, alcohol and substance abuse, high-risk sexual behaviors. It can lead to negative consequences for victims and their families and their communities. We have seen how abuse and violence against women and girls are passed from generation to generation. It becomes a vicious cycle, a cycle that we are working to break, Madam Speaker. But as the Minister responsible for Gender and Child Affairs, Madam Speaker, I often say when it comes to addressing the issue of gender-based violence and domestic violence, that you have to ensure that you're shame about births, that you don't have any shame in asking for help. And this government would have been reaching out to the civil society organizations to partner with us and receiving the help and support. When it comes to reaching out to international agencies to partner with us, to help us to put best practice in place, to address situations around gender-based violence, we have been doing that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to quickly speak about the Spotlight Initiative to end gender-based violence, in fact, in particular violence against women and girls. And I'm sure the member for Mayaro would be able to support me in saying that that initiative is indeed making some inroads in the communities that we are piloting the Spotlight initiative. And on the Spotlight, Madam Speaker, we have been working not only with civil society organizations, government agencies, and the judiciary. We have also been working with the police service. I heard the member for Chaguanas West mention the need for continuous training of police officers and improving policing in Trinidad and Tobago, and the need for data. Spotlight initiative has allowed us to start gathering data and looking at the data and developing the best practices and best intervention to help to address issues around crime and violence. Spotlight initiative has allowed us to work alongside the police service to provide training for police officers in terms of how they respond in instances of domestic violence and gender-based violence, because we know sometimes, Madam Speaker, if you go to the police and your first interaction is the one that is positive and you feel as though you didn't get the right response, you wouldn't want to go back. So we're training the officers in terms of how they respond and how they deal with family violence. So by their training, we improve capacity within the service. We have done work with the judiciary, Madam Speaker, to help to improve the justice system. I know under the former Attorney General, a lot of work would have been done ensuring that the judiciary would have had the space they need to have additional courts. Madam Speaker, we have been doing the work. I know Trinidad and Tobago may be saying that it's not being done fast enough, but it is being done, and it would take some time. But while we are doing the work, we cannot allow ourselves to lose hope. Madam Speaker, once there's hope, there's an opportunity for change, real change to happen in Trinidad and Tobago. We have partnered with the Gender-Based Violence Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Ministry of Education, as well as the Children's Authority, trying to improve the way we provide interventions in our communities and in our spaces, and particularly for our children and our vulnerable women. Madam Speaker, we have partnered with civil society organizations. Over the last few years, despite the fact that we just have our struggles in terms of our resources, we would have consistently provided subventions and grants to a number of civil society organizations working in the trenches on a day-to-day basis, doing some of the work that government may not be able to do in some of the most vulnerable communities, reaching out to families and communities that need the support to ensure that we create this peaceful society that we all desire. Madam Speaker, just in fiscal 2022, we have provided support for 11 civil society organizations to allow them to do work on the ground in various communities to help to address instances of crime and violence. Madam Speaker, again, I want to mention the Spotlight Initiative. Under this global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations, the Spotlight Initiative, which focuses specifically on family violence, which includes domestic violence, intimate partner violence, corporal punishment, child abuse, and acts of aggression within families. We have done the Foundations Program. The Foundations Program is a program developed through the UN system, and it is done in communities. in the last fiscal year, we'd have been able to do a trainers program where we train 12 individuals as trainers to then go into communities and work alongside organizations so that they develop the skills. We did facilitator training and 42 persons were trained. We did facilitator training around the deaf community, with the prison service, with MILAP, and with the Spotlight Initiative, we would have been able to do a gap analysis of the Domestic Violence Act to ensure that some of the weaknesses that we have picked up, we would be able to remedy them and bring about better circumstances for those persons who would have need to access the services and any remedial efforts under the Domestic Violence Act. And I want to commend the Office of the Attorney General for partnering with the Gender and Child Affairs Division and for also partnering with the UN system and the EU and all the other agencies under Spotlight so we could identify where or pieces of legislation need additional work and come to this honorable house and hopefully get the support of the opposition so that we bring about a greater relief for those vulnerable women in our society. Madam Speaker, under the same Spotlight Initiative, we would have received technical support for us to update the National Action Plan, the National Strategic Action Plan of Gender-Based Violence and Sexual Violence. That review and update would have recently been completed. It is now at the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, where the technical staff are looking at it. They're looking at the costing to see what measures we have already implemented, what measures are already in train, so that we could look at the costing and present to Cabinet a document that is workable and one that will be effective and that will run for 2023 to 2027. Madam Speaker, again, I hopefully would have the member for Mayaro in his contribution speak of some of the benefits, notwithstanding may identify some of the challenges in terms of crime and violence, but speak to some of the positive impacts within his constituency under the Spotlight Initiative, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, some of the other programs that we have done as a government to help to address issues of gender-based violence and to provide services for vulnerable women is the fact that we have established within Trinidad and Tobago a state-run domestic violence shelter, and we are currently reviewing the operation of these shelters to bring about a better quality of service for those for clients who utilize the shelters. As it is now, our shelters can be accessed by those women who are in need of as refuge, but also women who have children, including boys from the age of including boys over the age of 10. Madam Speaker, I heard the member for Mayaro referencing an article where it was said that women are not able to contact the 800 SAVE because they don't have money. But the 800 SAVE is a toll-free line. So I believe whether it is a landline or a cell phone, you should be able to connect to the 800 SAVE hotline, as well as, Madam Speaker, if it is a landline or a cell phone again, persons should be able to get onto the police service because that 996 emergency number, because that is also 999, because that is also a toll-free number. So just to remind the public, that's our 800 SAVE number for persons wishing to access the domestic violence hotline. It is toll-free. You should be able to access it by a landline or cell phone without it incurring any cost. But Madam Speaker, even so, if you cannot access the hotline service, I want to encourage persons who are in need of advice to visit one of the closest police stations in the community and reach out to the officers. I know it may not be feasible for some persons to go at the time they may need to go, but find somebody who you could confide in who will be able to accompany you to make that report, because help is available. And I want to encourage citizens, notwithstanding the fact that some may say that the protection orders may not work, help is available, and we are looking at ways in which we can further improve the system so that you could get the help and the relief that you deserve. I want to encourage citizens, please reach out. Madam Speaker, We recognize that in terms of dealing with gender-based violence, that if men are part of the problem, then they should be part of the solution. So we have been rolling out a number of programs and initiatives under gender and child affairs to reach men and to engage them in the discourse and discussion so that they themselves become advocates. So we have what we call the Barbershop Initiative, which provides a safe space for men and boys to meet and to discuss the different issues around gender-based violence and around gender and the different factors that may help to perpetuate a culture of violence in Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to gender-based violence, and to help them to review and to critically assess some of the things that we would have considered as norms in our society that are indeed harmful and bring about a change in mindset. In response to the public, again, Madam Speaker, and engaging public discussion and public education, we would have developed what we call the town hall meetings, which focus on gender-based violence. Our first town hall meeting, it was focused on educating the public on how to access services and how to look at the way COVID-19 would have impacted us in terms of gender-based violence. At that first town hall meeting, we had 1,075 persons participating in that one online. Madam Speaker, we had another town hall meeting where we discussed issues around death before divorce. Why are some men unable to walk away? And in that particular town hall meeting, which was virtual again, we had a past perpetrator coming on board, sharing his stories and encouraging men to review their behavior and encouraging women to indeed reach out for help. We also had another town hall meetings that would have advised the public on the various services available for them through the government, through the civil society organization, etc., so that those who need the help would get the help at the time that they need it. In terms of data, Madam Speaker, the member for Shoguanas West indicated there is a critical need for us to have data and use data to inform the development of policies and programs. We have a central registry on domestic violence. Yes, that is also under review with the support of the Spotlight Initiative. But through the central registry on domestic violence, we are indeed capturing information and data that we use to shape our various intervention as it pertains to gender-based violence in Trinidad and Tobago. The Honourable Member for Shoguanas West also mentioned in referencing the article that was published around the 16 days of activism, what has been happening in terms of outreach. Madam Speaker, from time immemorial, since we have been in government, we have always observed the 16 days of activism and partnered with various organizations within Trinidad and Tobago to heighten our public outreach and activities around that time so that we remind the public of the dangers, of the threats associated with gender-based violence, and also to encourage more citizens to come on board and work with us as we work towards ending this scourge. So 16 days of gender-based, 16 days of activism. We engage civil society, we engage private sector, we engage government agencies, and we work with them to provide additional information. Madam Speaker, I would have mentioned the data and the need for us to gather data. I'm proud to note that we finally would have launched our National Children's Registry. We have data already going into the system. Madam Speaker, I was asked why it is that I believe in the potential of the National Children's Registry, and I would have shared a personal story at that time. Madam Speaker, what the registry does, it provides an opportunity for better coordination among government agencies, but it also allows us to hold each other accountable as government agencies, but for us to also hold parents and families accountable. So, for example, Madam Speaker, a child isn't presenting for school, so missed a couple of days, an alert will be triggered, which will cause the intervention of not only the Ministry of Education, but also the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to go in and see what is happening with that family. Madam Speaker, that is tackling violence at the root, because sometimes it is because of problems within the home that would then escalate to violence manifesting in the wider society. And this government over the years would have spent billions of dollars bolstering, strengthening the social safety networks in Trinidad and Tobago through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. There has been significant investment made in National Family Services Division, ensuring that we have social workers going out into the communities, working with our families to address issues. The Ministry of Sport and Community Development through the Community Mediation Program, helping persons to understand how to deal with conflict in a positive way, Madam Speaker. So we have been making the right interventions at the right time. However, it would take some time for us to reap the benefits and the changes that we want to see, but we cannot lose hope. Madam Speaker, we are currently working for the establishment of a shelter for male survivors of domestic violence. Over the Carnival period, there are a number of different calypsos, etc., focusing on women. But also, Madam Speaker, we have to recognize that there are men in our society who are also hurting. And there's a saying, hurt people hurt people. That is why this government is working to ensure that we provide a place of safety for those men who fall victim within their own homes, so that they would have a refuge to go to, Madam Speaker. We do not want instances of family violence to escalate, but if they do, we are providing a safe space for all persons who need that place of refuge. Madam Speaker, we are also working to develop a quick course around gender-based violence, and this is coming off the success we saw on the quick course that was developed to educate the public on child abuse. Thousands of Trimbigonians would have accessed that child abuse quick course and would have engaged with the ministry through online platforms, and we have engaged with our child rights ambassadors and different persons based on the information coming out from that quick course. So we decided that we would develop a gender-based violence awareness quick course, and again use the platform of social media so the public can access it at their own time and learn and understand how it impacts not only persons individually, but how it impacts our communities and the wider society. Madam Speaker, in terms of the Spotlight Initiative and it moving ahead, Trinidad and Tobago, I'm happy to note, would have received the approval of the Spotlight team and the UN to continue in this fiscal for another year of the Spotlight Initiative. Most of our country programs would have already been approved, and this phase 2 of Spotlight would have commenced. Madam Speaker, Spotlight has the potential to really change the landscape in Trinidad and Tobago, but for that to happen, every citizen must become fully engaged. When we talk about children, we need children, as we tell them about their rights and the responsibilities that accompany their rights, we need children to become advocates themselves, to use the various platforms that they have access to speak out and speak up in their own defense. And when we talk about families, Madam Speaker, we need families to be honest. Madam Speaker, when someone commits a crime, that person didn't just drop out of a tree and land in Trinidad and Tobago. That person came from a home. That person came from a...
Honourable Member, you have 5 more minutes left of your original speaking time. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your contribution if you so wish.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That person came from a family. And Madam Speaker, in response to a journalist recently, I would have said, it would call for all of us to make the tough decision of turning in even our loved ones. If we know our sons or daughters or husbands, girlfriends, whatever, are involved in criminal activity, then we have a duty to speak up and report, Madam Speaker. And lots of times, Madam Speaker, when they kill, when they go out and they rob, they come right back home and they lie down on the bed next to their girlfriend or their boyfriend. And then the girlfriend and boyfriend know that they went out and they put on a piece of work. But we're not reporting it, and then we blame the police. But if the police doesn't get the information, then how we expect them to act? We have to start making the tough decisions as citizens and reporting on even those that we hold near and dear to our heart. We have to hold each other accountable. As I said at the beginning, To end crime and violence in Trinidad and Tobago, to bring about a peaceful society, we need an all-of-society approach. It is not up to the government alone. It is not up to the police or the judiciary. We can all make an impact. Firstly, by looking at ourselves and really honestly searching ourselves and asking, what can I do better? How am I contributing to the state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago? What should I change? What should I adopt within my own personal life and personal space to bring about a better society? Madam Speaker, we would see the change that we want to see. I strongly believe in the potential of Trinidad and Tobago to be a great nation. But all of us, we must all believe in the potential of our Trinidad and Tobago to be a great nation. People talk about Trinidad and Tobago. Well, Trinidad basically is not a real place. This, Madam Speaker, is our space. We have to claim it as our own. And we have to stand up and fight in our individual spaces to do better and be better. Madam Speaker, time would come when we'll all have to account. We would have to account at election times, but we have to account at the end of time when we close our eyes and we have to face our maker. Madam Speaker, so me, when I had to go and face the great maker, I want to say I have done my best. I want to be able to say I gave of my best and I served the people well. If an election cycle come around, I want to be able to watch my people, my constituents in the face and tell them, I represented you well. Me and thief, me and do anything corrupt, me and bugger anybody, me and bother anybody. I work on your behalf. And as leaders in this house, that is the message we should be going out and carrying into our communities by setting the example. But first, let us change the language. Let us change the way we speak about ourselves and our country. Trinidad and Tobago is indeed a real and great place. There's work to be done, but collectively, we can do it, Madam Speaker, and we can ensure that we reduce crime and violence. Government is doing its part. We are putting the policies in place. We are going to ensure that policies that we develop, that there's effective implementation of policy, and we are going to hold those who are responsible for implementing policies accountable. But let us hold each other accountable as well, Madam Speaker. I thank you.
Member for St. Augustine.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Will the minister state whether there are plans to install CCTV cameras in the heights of Aripo where the bodies of murder victims has been found? April 2022, almost 1 year ago, the Minister of National Security, right here in this Parliament, indicated a long-winded kind of answer, but I'll summarize for the safety of our heirs. In order for CCTV cameras to be installed at the heights of Aripo, careful consideration must be given to site stability, including the availability of electricity supply and the connectivity challenges and the remote location. Madam Speaker, the minister indicated that the possible expansion of the CCTV network throughout Trinidad and Tobago, including heights of Aripo, required stakeholder discussions, which were, at that time, he said, currently underway. 2 months shy of 1 year, who are the stakeholders who have been consulted? What was the outcome? And the fact remains that there have been zero real results and any action from this government. Another failure of the Minister of National Security to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, again, on the 5th of February 2021, the Minister of National Security at that time the Honorable Stuart Young, stated that non-functional CCTV cameras were being removed across Trinidad and Tobago, and that while those that were usable were being repaired, he also indicated that there was a total of 1,796 CCTV cameras installed throughout the country, but you had just under 700 of those non-functional, an admission of failure from this government to protect citizens. This government has to accept the responsibility for the murder rate spiraling out of control. And they have failed in every aspect of national security, including the protection of women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I recall at that time in the media, both MP Beckles, MP for Arima, and the Minister of Public Utilities, MP Gonzalez, sort of admitted to the failure of the government when it came to CCTV cameras in Heights of Aripo and adequate street lighting. We also spoke about safe public transport. But you know what? An admission might be the first step in accepting failure, but the truth is that is not enough. We need to see action, and all we are getting is talk and policy talk and consultation and no real action. It is the same thing with the pepper spray legislation. It is only when we're under pressure from the opposition and the public that the government brought pepper spray legislation to Parliament after 6 years of promises. And now I question whether this was only to appease and quiet the population and the growing number of people who are speaking out and calling for pepper spray legislation. And we ask ourselves as a nation now, what is the status? What is the real action that has taken place when it comes to pepper spray legislation? I would really like to hear members on the other side in this debate share with the population. You're not sharing with only the UNC members when you speak in Parliament. You have to account to the nation. Tell us the number of applications that have been processed and granted by the Commissioner of Police for the manufacture, produce, import, export, diversion or selling or distribution of pepper spray according to Section 17(4)(a) of the new Firearms Act. Tell us how many citizens have been granted this license to purchase and carry pepper spray for their personal protection, which was the objective of the legislation in the first place. You have given us such a long waiting period for the legislation to become a reality. But if it's not happening on the ground, then you have failed to be effective. Madam Speaker, the pepper spray, what we call the pepper spray legislation, is part of the Firearms Act. Given the long waiting period we have and the very controversial process where we see ministers attempting to insert themselves into the process and so on, for the application of firearms, can citizens, and women in particular, realistically expect real results from this so-called pepper spray legislation? What is the reality? And this government continues to talk about policy and what their intention is and so on, but the reality is that you have continued to fail the women of this country in providing them pepper spray to protect themselves. Madam Speaker, this government has been always busy criticizing citizens and attacking anyone who dares to speak out against them. They label them unpatriotic, they label them a UNC, and because they have a different opinion to the government, including Calypsonians over the Carnival who were muzzled. Madam Speaker, I want to move now to another aspect
that the government has really failed in that would provide some sort of protection and safety for women in our country, and that is street lighting. In this day and age, this government is still failing to provide adequate street lighting. Now, street lighting is an important factor that is recognized even internationally for improving the safety of women as well as other vulnerable groups by making public spaces more viable and reducing opportunities for crime. Adequate street lighting really does help to increase the feeling of safety and security amongst women. And it does help to deter perpetrators and make it easier for people to see and report suspicious behavior. And it also would provide better visibility for law enforcement and help the police in their work. Street lighting and public transport, safe public transport, also goes hand in hand. Where is this government when it comes to providing safe public transport for women in Trinidad and Tobago? Again, they have failed. Madam Speaker, do you know that this government has discontinued PTSC transport service on several routes in this country since they came into government, particularly in rural areas? And what this does is force citizens to rely on PH drivers and put themselves at further risk. I remember the Minister of Works and Transport making some promises, you know. And those at PTSC and the Minister himself have been unable to account for the discontinuation in the route. But the truth is that many of those routes, the roads have become so deplorable because of the neglect of this government that the buses can no longer access certain areas. So you have failure on top of failure, compounding the problem for the public. Madam Speaker, public transport is an important factor in protecting women. And it means that transportation used by many women in an area where women face harassment and violence, they may be at risk of rape, kidnappings, robberies, and even murder. And to improve safety and to protect women while using public transport, there are measures that can be taken that the government has failed to take. It is important to have well-lit, well-maintained, clearly marked transport stops and stations. The reality is, in Trinidad and Tobago, many women, and most of them are working women, who travel late, are forced to wait on dark corners for a PH car in the hope that they will get somebody who they can trust or take them home safely, thanks to the neglect of this government. Having these well-lit spaces could help women to feel safe and enable them to easily identify where they need to go so you would not jump in the wrong vehicle. And additionally, in many countries, information on schedules for public transport is available digitally. It means that you can tell whether you have adequate seating. You can provide shelter for those who are waiting, secured shelter. You can help make public transport more accessible and user-friendly for women. Having Wi-Fi in public transport hubs is also an element of providing safety because it allows women or people in general, the traveling public, to communicate in case of an emergency and to track the schedule of the buses and so on. I remember there was a campaign promise of this government to provide free Wi-Fi in buses. Whatever happened to that? Another failed PNM promise that never materialized. In fact, instead of adding Wi-Fi to the buses, they have removed buses from some of the routes. So it is backward, backward, backward. Madam Speaker, what we should be having is training for transport staff to ensure that they understand how to respond to harassment and violence against women in transport hubs, how to recognize suspicious behavior. And this would include developing protocols for dealing with sexual harassment, for providing customer service training, and encouraging staff to speak up and intervene when they witness harassment and violence. But what happens? We are at the mercy of the criminals. Madam Speaker, PTSC is not the only provider of public transport in Trinidad and Tobago. So thanks to the failure of this government, more and more routes, especially rural routes, as I mentioned before, are serviced by taxis, maxi taxis, and the controversial PH cars or private cars for hire. Madam Speaker, allow me to touch on the issue of PH taxis as it relates to crime and safety for women. This government's failure to protect our women from those operating a motor vehicle as a PH taxi or a private hire taxi, which is illegal, we know. But the fact is that PH cars provide a necessary service for the public in Trinidad and Tobago. And there are some areas that you cannot get any form of transport apart from PH cars. Allow me to share an excerpt from a legal opinion on the regularization of PH transport from an insurance law perspective that I came across. And I think, you know, we have heard so many promises from the government when it comes to regulating PH. And I feel now that, I feel as mama guy. I feel that they have just been saying these things to comfort the population, and they have no intention of doing it. Operating, and I begin to quote the article, operating a motor vehicle as a PH taxi or private hire taxi is illegal. But the fact is that PH taxis provide a necessary service for the general public in Trinidad and Tobago. This argument does not change the fact that operating a private motor vehicle as a PH is a direct violation of existing laws and likely the insurance policy obtained in respect of such a vehicle. Unfortunately, arising from various recent tragedies involving young women who were allegedly passengers in such vehicles, comes a clamor for change, including a renewed vigor to examine the issue of regularizing PH taxis. All public transport services are legislated and regulated at the national level. Pursuant to the Motor Vehicles Act and the Motor Vehicles Regulations, a distinction is made between private vehicles and vehicles used for public transportation. The article goes on to say that typically an insurance obtained in respect of the motor vehicle should indicate limitations as to its use for that vehicle. And limitations as to its use may specifically restrict the use of this private vehicle that is insured to social, domestic, and pleasure purposes, and the carrying out of such activities may be done by an authorized driver. Therefore, the operation of a vehicle for hire with these limitations is in fact a contravention to the policy of the insurance. The risk is a heavy one for those who use their private motor vehicle as a taxi. If there's an accident, the law does not permit an insurance company to deny liability to a third party, even if the driver of the insured motor vehicle was not operating in accordance with the insurance contract. And this piece was written by Sherry Gopi, who is a partner at Hamill Smith & Company, a law firm. The legal opinions proffered at the time when this became topical came about to give good advice to then and still the Minister of Works and Transport, Senator Rohan Sinanan, who promised with great bravado to legalize PH taxis. At the time when the opposition asked questions in Parliament, I think Minister Terence Deyalsingh had answered in place of the Attorney General in response to the questions. And the minister at that time said, after a series of stakeholder discussions last year. Now, this, let me just, for the record, this was in April of 2022. So this would have been 2 years ago that the minister was referring to as last year. He indicated that a policy document was drafted in relation to PH vehicles. It is being reviewed by the Attorney General at present and will be submitted to the Cabinet shortly for consideration. Deyalsingh noted, however, that there were several issues identified and associated with the PH sector, including breaches of the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act and so on, for public safety, etc. Madam Speaker, 1 year ago, they said that they had concluded the discussions 1 year ago. And to date, you have no action when it comes to the government promise to regulate PH drivers. Another failure of this government to protect our women and girls and the traveling public from criminals. Madam Speaker, another thing that you would have that made public spaces safe was, apart from police stations, the erection of police posts. The PNM had promised, several times to put police posts in areas where women were notoriously being attacked and where bodies were being disposed or bodies were being found, such as Heights of Aripo and so on. We have had time passing, and there seems to be no political will from this government to ensure that police posts are stationed in those at-risk areas. An increase in police posts will help to address crime. What we have instead of police posts being added is the removal of police posts from some of these at-risk areas. Police posts present a deterrence. The presence of police officers serve to deter potential attackers and potential offenders from committing crime and pouncing upon citizens. Knowing that the police are present in an area would help discourage criminals from committing crimes, particularly if their vehicle or the police unit is visible and active in terms of their enforcement efforts. Rapid response from the police, and with increased police presence and police response, again, that is another deterrent. Community engagement. When police officers are assigned to specific areas and they have opportunity to build relationships with community members, it improves trust and communication between law enforcement and the community. You can and should have a greater cooperation between the police and the community. But Madam Speaker, you know what I find to be a spoke in that wheel? Our police officers are so under-resourced and underpaid. Some of them could barely afford rent and food for their children, and they are forced to have side hustles. And there are so many allegations of police officers engaging in criminal activities in the very communities that they are expected to build trust in. And this is because this government continues to undermine police officers, forcing them to buy their own bulletproof vests and their own equipment and so on. You compromise police officers who are supposed to be agents of trust and protect and serve. Madam Speaker.
Please. Member, I'll ask you to withdraw that and find another way to see it, please. Okay.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the lack of resources, I withdraw that. And I want to say instead that the lack of resources to police officers, the poor salaries, and puts them in a predicament that would cause the public to lose trust in them. And the failure to provide these resources the failure to pay the police officers adequately is on this government. It is a failure of this government. Madam Speaker, when we look specifically at murders, in terms of the murders of women, the figures are lower than that of the male counterparts. There was an article in the Newsday in just December of last year where they were doing a review and they spoke about the murder toll in 2022 exceeding 600. The youngest murder victim in this country was a 1-year-old child, Nova Brereton, who was shot dead along with her mother, a 30-year-old, Sachel Elliott. And the oldest murder victim, according to this article, was an 88-year-old woman, Evelyn Piper, who was found dead at her home in Gasparilla. Our women and girls are being gunned down, they are being beaten, they are being put at risk further and further because of this government's failure. While there's so much discussion about the murder rate in 2022, exceeding that of 2021, and even 2021 exceeding that of 2020, we have seen a perpetual rise in the number of murders. But I want to speak specifically, Madam Speaker, and put on record the number of murders in Trinidad and Tobago under this PNM government, number of women murdered. In 2017, there were 495 murders overall, 53 were women. In 2018, there were 517 murders in all, 47 were women. In 2019, there were 536 murders, 64 were women. In 2020, there were 392 murders, 54 were women. In 2021, 448 murders, 33 were women. In 2022, there were 598 murders, a record number, and 57 were women. The Prime Minister of this country, in his New Year's Day message, indicated that this government was committed to making 2023 a year of public review and overhaul and redoubling its efforts to fight crime on several fronts. Which front? The COVID front? We have seen no reduction in murders. We have seen no reduction in serious crime. We have seen no improvement in the pace of justice in this country. And what we have is more citizens being scared. No member of this government could tell me that they feel safe in this country. Everyone would take precautions.
Honourable Member, you have 5 more minutes of ordinary speaking time to complete your contribution. You have an additional 15 minutes, which you may avail yourself of if you so wish.
Thank you. I wish to take the additional minutes. Madam Speaker, there is not a single member of this government who could feel safe or who could honestly say that they feel safe in Trinidad and Tobago because of the crime rate. And the fact is, all of us live here. I support my colleague, the member for Shogunas West, the Honourable Mr. Dinesh Rambali, who said that every one of us who are citizens, we are patriots of Trinidad and Tobago. We are not proud of our government, but we are proud of our country, Trinidad and Tobago, and we will stand in defense. Madam Speaker, I don't want to spend my precious minutes talking about the failed promises of the Prime Minister on New Year's Day. I want to move quickly to dealing more specifically with children. The member who spoke before me is the Minister in charge of the Division of Gender and Child Affairs. I was so appalled, you know. The member seemed totally disconnected, I think, with the reality of the horror that our children are facing under her leadership. The Division of Gender and Child Affairs was downgraded to a division which was a ministry under the Prime Ministership of Kamala Persad-Bissessar, now downgraded to a department in the Office of the Prime Minister. A Prime Minister who refers to women as golf courses to be groomed, whose level of care and concern is, I am not in your bedroom. Madam Speaker, the issues surrounding children and the protection of children in this country are so horrendous at this stage that to hear more promises that are so unrealistic is an insult to citizens. There was a recent article concerning the Children's Authority where they spoke, I believe it was to a Joint Select Committee, about an increase in applications for children in need of supervision, an increase in risk factors and conditions that required their intervention. And what we have is a total failure of the Prime Minister to protect the women and children of our country. Madam Speaker, at various intervals, at Joint Select Committee meetings of Parliament, and even in response to questions here, the Children's Authority is on record as being understaffed and under-resourced. And the minister with the responsibility continues to deny the blatant facts. The truth is, I remember during the midterm review, that finance committee that met, I remember there was a supplementation to the office of the Prime Minister, and when the members of the opposition questioned, they indicated that it was going to the Children's Authority, but they said that 70% of it was going towards staff. And, Madam, if you have an authority that is understaffed and under-resourced, this is the government putting a noose around the neck of an authority, and their failure of our children is a failure of the government, and they must accept responsibility. Madam Speaker, I remember because the member for Aruka South had asked if, this additional money was going towards surveillance cameras and so on, because you had some 5 teenage boys who had escaped from a home at that time. And the minister indicated that apart from providing surveillance cameras, the bulk of the money would be going towards human resources. So by coming and denying what is fact does not fix the problem. Madam Speaker, another issue we have in this country is the issue of missing women. There was an article in the Express this morning by Susan Mohammed, today, 24th of February. And I highlighted some parts that I thought were important because they interviewed the sister of Corinne Singh, who disappeared, I think, 5 years ago. And it was essentially a victim impact statement. Her sister spoke about the fact that her parents grieved and died 1 year apart from each other. She spoke about her son, Corinne Singh's nephew, suffering from, I think it was some sort of depression issues, how she herself could not function in her workplace, and how grief tore the family apart. She spoke about, Madam, and I want to quote the last paragraph, "The loss of Corinne was our family's greatest loss. At least with Mommy and Daddy, we know what happened to them. We got to say goodbye at a funeral. We know that they have gone to rest, but where is Corinne? We do not know, and I do not know if we ever will." Many families in this country face this kind of torment. The government's failure to provide resources to find missing women prevents that closure for families. Madam, I thought this article was relevant because in the court there are victim impact statements that can be given just before sentencing in court by a relative or the victim if they survive. But it takes 8 to 15 years for a murder trial from arrest to sentencing. And it means you have to languish so long before, and some never get the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. Madam Speaker, in the course of my representation, I've met the parents and relatives of Shade Emmanuel, a young woman who has been missing, I think, since 2018, who have no answers from this government. She was 20 years old. Her mother, Marilyn, said, "Shade is my only daughter. She was my light. I cannot celebrate anything without her." And we have been praying for a Christmas miracle for the past 4 years. 4 years. No answer. There was a case of Ria Sukde who went missing when she went to drop her children off to school. Again, her family have never been given the opportunity to gain closure, to find her back, to know whether she's alive or not. And I remember her husband, I think it was Frankie Rajkumar, her father, saying that he was hoping that with the passage of time, it would dull his pain and reduce his tears, but it has not. And I sit and we have hours of discussions, and people call the names of Ashanti Riley and Andrea Barrett and Khadija Kodjo and dozens of other women. But this government has shown no compassion or competence or political will to prevent this from happening. It bothers me that the Minister of National Security shows not 1 ounce of remorse when it comes to these women who are missing and murdered. And our Prime Minister says, choose your man wisely. Madam Speaker, of 552 missing people in Trinidad and Tobago as of 2022, 30 were dead, 466 were found, but 56 have vanished without a trace. Just vanished. And we have silence from this government, total silence. Madam Speaker, I just want to quickly mention that domestic violence, of course, is one of the areas that women lose their lives. And this minister in the Division of Child and Gender Affairs, at a time when women are at risk, at a time when the government have failed to make women and girls safe, at a time when there's an absolute failure to address issues for women and girls and safety, the former, I have to specify, I was going to say the disgraced Attorney General, but I shouldn't use that because it wouldn't really be specific enough.
The fact is that you used it, and you knew you shouldn't use it, so I'd ask you to withdraw it.
Right.
All right, and find another way to see what you'd like to see, please.
The former Attorney General who, yes, I've withdrawn. Right. The former Attorney General has failed in numerous aspects. He promised to make it easier for women to get protection from domestic violence situation. But this, I am not in your bedroom government, has continued on a path, and the truth is that in practice, while there's one thing in law, in practice it is still cumbersome and drawn out, and women are not being protected as they should be. The protection of our women by the court when it comes to domestic violence is still an area that has to be improved. Madam Speaker, the protection of women who are being recruited by gangs is something I also just want to mention. Madam Speaker, the fact is that the opposition gave the support to the government to implement the anti-gang legislation. The government promised that it knew where every gang leader was, and as soon as the legislation became reality, they were going to arrest every gang leader in Trinidad and Tobago. How many arrests have we had? How many gangs have been shut down in this country? The PNM continues to smile and laugh and go about their business as nothing happened. The fact is that young women are being forced to carry out crime in this country. They are being forced to marry criminal gang leaders as part of being inducted into the gang. They are being forced into drugs and prostitution. They are being forced to deal in arms and ammunition. And, Madam Speaker, this government has taken no action to prevent and protect our women. As a mother, as a woman, as a parliamentarian, I am disappointed in this government. And this government cannot expect any realistic thinking person to believe what they continue to repeat when they say that they are serious about crime. The facts speak otherwise. Crime, violence, and criminal activity has increased tremendously under the PNM. The women and girls and the children as a whole have not been protected by this government. The government continues to joke and laugh when it comes to crime. The Minister of National Security has been an abject failure. Not a single citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, including members of the government, feels safer now or at any time under the PNM's governance. The fact is, the PNM has failed when it comes to protecting citizens from crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for bringing this motion on crime to the Parliament. While the government may have a majority and they will vote, the fact is that crime is not an issue only for this Parliament, it is an issue for everyone in this country. And this opportunity for us to highlight issues and make recommendations to the government, I trust that the government could, rather than blame the opposition, that they will take the suggestions for increased street lighting, increased public transport, safe spaces, for the Children's Authority to be addressed, for community policing, for CCTV cameras, for pepper spray to become a reality, that they will take those recommendations and make them a reality. Because that is not about, it is not about what the opposition says. It is the public who will have to judge your performance. Forget the UNC. Do what is right for Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion, which gives me an important opportunity properly to outline context before I get to the substance of the motion. And by context, I just want to say a little word about the Office of the Attorney General, which is a significant feature in any constitutional democracy. The concept of an Attorney General is traceable to 13th century Britain, but the term, it is said, first appeared in 1461 when John Herbert appointed a turnus generalis by letters patent. The role of an Attorney General is a complex one which calls for the balancing of political interests and the wider public interest. This tension
Both sides. I'm happy to see that you all are really communicating in a very jovial way, but I'd ask if you can't contain yourselves to carry the conversation outside.
As I was saying, thank you, Madam Speaker. The role of an Attorney General is a complex one which calls for the balancing of political interests and the wider public interest. This tension arises from the fact that the Attorney General's role spans a number of areas, and it is the reason why I thought I would dwell on that in the context of this motion, which are of crucial importance to the administration of justice and the rule of law. It is an office which is within government and Parliament, and also includes an independent public interest dimension. This historical constitutional legacy is now enshrined in our written constitution through sections 75 and 76. It is within this context, Madam Speaker, and with your leave, that today I rise to address some aspects of this motion which engages this House, that is to say, recitals 2, 3, 4, and 6. Recital 2 seeks to address the management, it is alleged, by the government of organs responsible for national security, law and order. Madam Speaker, I first of all acknowledge that the preceding speaker last year, the Minister of National Security, has already addressed some of the matters that I'm going to touch on, and where I do, I simply underline what he has already said, and I salute his speech in that regard. The Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs is cognizant that the criminal justice system consists of numerous interlocking organs of government in the broader constitutional context that depend on each other to accomplish a single key objective. That is, to provide effective and efficient justice to everyone, which includes taking a firm stance in the fight against crime for the peace, order, and good government of this unique republic, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. In its contribution to improving the justice system, my office endeavors to ensure full collaboration with all arms of the state's crime-fighting machinery, including national security and law enforcement, and will continue to offer critical support and resources to help those agencies in carrying out their responsibilities successfully and efficiently. This is part of this government's demonstrable commitment to addressing crime through significant support to key justice sector agencies. The Public Defender's Department, if I may dwell on that for a moment, Madam Speaker, for decades, there was a clarion call for the creation of a Public Defender's Department in Trinidad and Tobago in order to address problems brought on by an insufficient number of criminal defense attorneys, the presence of which is important in our justice system. In March 2022, this government created a state-funded public defender system with the appointment of a chief public defender to oversee for the first time in the history of this country an available pool of state-paid defense attorneys. The department received brand new accommodation in July 2020 and continues to grow with ongoing recruitment as part of and operating with the legal aid system of this country. My office continues to collaborate with our international partners to ensure that this department receives top-class training and continued resourcing. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Madam Speaker, the constitutionally independent office of the Director. That office continues to receive ongoing support from my office. We all know the DPP's office plays a critical role in the justice system. In recognition in that and as a priority, one of my first calls of duty on my appointment in March 2022 was to visit with the Director and his staff mere months later in July 2022. Challenges faced by the DPP's office were discussed openly with the staff and the DPP, and my office continues to place priority on addressing staffing capacity and providing new accommodation for the Director and his staff. Significant resources have been contributed to by this government in providing legal and support staff, in acquiring new accommodation in Tobago, Port of Spain, and San Fernando, in providing extensive technological resources, including but not limited to Wi-Fi connectivity, laptops, print solutions, virtual courtrooms, and in establishing a case management solution which manages cases throughout their life cycle and increases user interaction, reporting, collaboration, centralized case tracking, and management in order to better document caseload and provide electronic file management, records management, scheduling, and case status tracking. Notably, Madam Speaker, the Judiciary's ICT unit is also working together with the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs ICT unit to develop a file transfer protocol to provide for the secure transfer of large committal bundles. This interrelates with the efforts being made with the case management system and illustrates stakeholder coordination to ensure an improved efficiency of both organizations as well as an improved criminal justice as a whole. Madam Speaker, my office also ensures that the Director of Public Prosecution's office is invited to participate in all workshops, training and collaborations, both locally and abroad, and will continue to prioritize the needs of that office and its staff. Forensics. In the area of forensics, Madam Speaker, steps have been taken towards the construction of a new forensic lab. There has been an increase...
Madam Speaker, I unfortunately rise on Standing Order 4410. The Attorney General has been here for quite some time.
Okay, so we all know that it's a debate, Attorney General, and I'm sure you'll comply by the rules of the standing orders with respect to it being a debate.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, permit me to make mention of the establishment of the Justice Stakeholder Advisory Committee on Forensic and Medical Legal Evidence, chaired by the Criminal Justice Unit of my office. This committee comprises key representatives from a number of different organs and agencies within this country: the Ministry of National Security, the Judiciary, Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and other key stakeholder agencies. The committee has made substantial progress in its work in resolving some of the problems of the Forensic Science Center. In DNA testing, the retention of additional pathologists, the implementation of a priority system for DNA analysis to increase efficiency, and initiating the process of accreditation to the center, which is almost complete. Prisons, Madam Speaker. Only very recently we were in this House when we participated in the commitment of this government to listen to the calls of our prison officers to address the fact of the threat that they face on a day-to-day basis when they are both coming to work and leaving work and going off work. So we have passed in this House only this month legislation which now allows prison officers to be armed when they are leaving work. That is part of the commitment of this country, as I said in the debate then, of this government, as I said in the debate then, to be concerned about equipping our first responders to be able to address the problems that are inherent in performing difficult jobs, difficult tasks, thankless jobs, sometimes thankless tasks for which they are pilloried and for which they are not appropriately recognized. This government, in its efforts to recognize and to equip our prison officers in the crime-fighting initiatives, has listened to their call. A number of new facilities have also been implemented throughout the country, Madam Speaker. Dedicated centers for child rehabilitation, improved surveillance systems, video courts, and the installation of grabbers and jammers. The Canadian government has provided top management with extensive training in corrections management and best practices in electronic monitoring, all of which have already been implemented and adopted. Madam Speaker, I want to remind the citizenry of this country that this government fully recognizes the threats faced by our law enforcement agencies, so that within the last 7 years, in 2019, members will recall, the citizens will recall, that we passed the Miscellaneous Provisions Law Enforcement Officers Act 2019 in order to drastically increase the penalties associated with offenses committed against law enforcement officers. The recital, which speaks to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service being progressively under-resourced, an overstatement and a nice soundbite for social media. Our police service has received significant attention from this government. Several specialist units have been created within the police service to boost efficiency and to streamline processes, including the Child Protection Unit, the Organized Crime and Intelligence Unit, the National Operational Task Force, the gender-based violence unit, the legal unit, and the sexual offenses unit, all of whom are addressing the very problems that have been belabored by the member who spoke last from St. Augustine. The bottom line being that the work continues, and it is very easy to sensationalize the fact of there being insufficient attention while the hard work is ongoing. We have the enhanced white-collar units comprising the Financial Investigation Branch, the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau, and I pause there to recognize and to take note of the fact, consistent with this government's respect for the rule of law and the separation of powers, the fact that the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau was moved out of the Office of the Attorney General back to where it properly belongs within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. All of that being part of this government's commitment to developing a comprehensive, cohesive, and interlocking relationship amongst different units of the police service, the fraud squad, cybercrime unit, and others, to deal with and to address the ongoing criminal situation in this country. New accommodation has also been provided to house specialist prosecutors, investigators, forensic accountants, forensic auditors, and specialist attorneys who visited from the United Kingdom tasked with white-collar crime investigations. Further, accommodation has also been provided for the legal unit, the Financial Investigation Branch, and the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service at Tower C at the International Waterfront Center. The police service, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, has progressively been acquiring new technology in crime management. Body-worn cameras have been secured and are being utilized in order to capture real-time data of police interactions as mechanisms to ensure impartiality and to assist with complaints against and about police misconduct. Additionally, Madam Speaker, electronic identification parades, digital recording of interviews, automated fingerprint identification systems, mobile ad hoc networking technology, global positioning system, closed-circuit television, and speed detection devices are but some of the technological advances that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is using in its day-to-day support and operations as supported by this government. Most recently, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has undertaken a digitization drive, bringing most of their processes involving members of the public to an online platform, allowing members of the public to now be able to make reports online and to request certificates of good character. My office has spearheaded the passage of the Evidence Act No. 1 of 2021, which provides for the use of various identification procedures with respect to suspects, the procedure for the conduct of suspect interviews, and oral admissions. The Act further provides for special measures, evidence by recording, and the admissibility of CCTV coverage and footage as an exception to the hearsay rule. This government, Madam Speaker, has devoted considerable resources for better police accommodation. I can cite but a few examples of police stations which were previously closed down by the opposition and which have been reopened, including the Mariah Police Station in Tobago, St. Mary's Police Station in Moruga Tableland, and the Barataria Police Station. We have also, Madam Speaker, the Sinclair Police Station, which also reopened in July 2022, boasting a suite of services from the Special Victims Department, which includes Gender-Based Violence Unit, the Sexual Offenses Unit, and the Child Protection Unit, alongside the core services of a normal, functioning police station, reopened in July 2022. That police station also contains a juvenile booking center with juvenile center holding suites, an identification parade room, and interview room. The station was specifically remodified to cater to the needs of police officers, Madam Speaker, and their clients with amenities conducive to a safe and comfortable environment for interventions, interviews, and investigations. Another key milestone was the reopening of the Carnival police station in 2021 and the subsequent establishment of the Trinidad and Tobago Coastal and Riverine Patrol Unit to patrol the coastline and rivers of Trinidad and Tobago, where intelligence reports suggest that narcotics, firearms, and illegal immigrants and trafficking might be taking place. Human trafficking, something which has been spoken to again by the member for St. Augustine without a proper appreciation of the work that is ongoing on an ongoing basis every day to counter serious illegality taking place in this country. The coastal and riverine units also assist the Coast Guard in patrolling our territorial waters and searching for illegal migrants who are trying to enter our country. Madam Speaker, we are also progressively responding to the firearms challenges in this country. The Special Evidence Recovery Unit established a ballistic department. And thus far, and the Minister of National Security spoke to this, 21 police officers have been trained as ballistics experts. Trafficking as well is a key priority of this government. And as such, the Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons Working Group has been established to fast-track trafficking matters. Madam Speaker, I wish to take the opportunity to state here today that the hard-working men and women of our police service are appreciated by this government for their dedication to service and to this country. And this government recognized their efforts by recently promoting over 200 corporals to the rank of sergeant and one to the rank of inspector on the same day. This was not an isolated event, Madam Speaker, and this exercise will continue in the future. Legislative amendments are also being made surrounding the Police Complaints Authority as an additional safeguard aimed at addressing complaints against errant police officers and ensuring that the few bad apples who tarnish the reputation of a good, effective police service in the public's eye and undermine the hard work of those dedicated officers is brought to bear, brought to book. I have been in regular contact since taking office with the director of the Police Complaints Association, the Police Complaints Authority, Mr. David West, and I compliment him on the hard work that he is doing and the support that I know that this government is giving to the Complaints Authority. A suite of legislative amendments were introduced by this government, Madam Speaker. The Miscellaneous Provisions Administration of Justice Act 2020, the Miscellaneous Provisions Special Reserve and Police Complaints Authority Act 2021, and the Miscellaneous Provisions FATF Compliance Act dealing with trafficking and anti-terrorism compliance 2020, which expanded the powers and remit of the authority. When we turn, Madam Speaker, to the motion which seeks to address what is said to be the rising murder toll in this country. Of course, we acknowledge that it is no secret that the murder toll is at an unacceptable high, and work is being done on that every day. We acknowledge the number of murders that have taken place within the last 3 months. Madam Speaker, this only serves to underscore, in my respectful submission, the continuing call by this government every day when we come to this House, to the opposition, to collaborate in the fight against crime. Do not use those statistics to gain political points. Madam Speaker, the opposition's lack of support for crime-fighting law makes this motion nothing less than deceitful. Our Constitution was written to ensure respect for good governance and the rule of law. Good governance, through the working of this very honorable House, constitutionally contemplates responsible government on both sides of the House. That is why we have a parliament to pass laws. The passage of laws is not only the responsibility of the elected government of the day. It requires a collaborative effort in the national interest by all those who cry out and say, Trinidad is in trouble, and look at what is happening. And this motion seeks to point to that. It requires a collaborative effort by both sides of this House to pass legislation to provide our first responders and all other organs of government with the tools with which to address the problems which plague our country. Only in June of this year, Madam Speaker, and I will spend a little time on this because it is very important for the citizens to understand and appreciate the important role of this Honorable House. Only in June of last year, in the Privy Council decision of Suraj, June 20th, 2026, that case reiterated the fact that Parliament is established as the body with authority to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of this country. Not the elected government, but Parliament with the cooperation of both sides of the divide in this House. The elected House of Representatives is the principal institution of the state. And this is Suraj speaking, the Privy Council, which gives effect to the democratic principle. And it does so according to the usual democratic procedure of one person, one vote on the basis of decision-making by an ordinary majority. Madam Speaker, this government continuously returns to this Parliament with legislation in the hope of garnering the support of members on the other side, but who to this date are determined to derail any attempt by the government to fulfill its mandate to protect the citizens of this country from the ever-increasing effects of crime, so that motions like this can be filed to say, look, the government is doing nothing about crime, when they do not support the efforts of this government in coming to this House to say, let us pass the legislation to give us the working tools to combat the crime. The Privy Council in Suraj, if I may be permitted to quote with your leave, Madam President, Madam Speaker, beg your pardon, from paragraph 68 of that decision, said, among other things, a very large part of ordinary legislation passed by Parliament for good reasons of the public interest must inevitably interfere with or operate as restrictions on fundamental rights. In the board's view, it is not plausible to suppose, and they went back to 1962, to our independence, it is not plausible to suppose that the framers of the 1962 Constitution and the current Constitution intended to disable Parliament from taking ordinary legislative action in the public interest. The natural solution to accommodate the inevitable friction which always exists between individual fundamental rights and democratic decision-making in a constitutional liberal democracy like Trinidad and Tobago is that conventionally adopted so often in such states, namely to require that interference with such rights should be permitted in the public interest, but bearing in mind that that interference must be proportionate in its aim.
Attorney General, you have 5 minutes left of ordinary speaking time. You're entitled to 15 further minutes to complete your contribution. Might I ask how much longer you will be?
I think just about 10 more minutes. Thank you, Madam.
Okay, so we will allow the Attorney General to complete his contribution.
Thank you very much. And when I speak about the efforts of this government to bring legislation to this House, and the fact that the opposition is committed to derailing those efforts to protect the citizenry of this country, we only have to reflect on the attempt of this government last year, July, in trying to pass the bail amendment extension of duration bill 2022. This House will recall that the bill sought to extend provisions in that bill to extend the life to provide for denial of bail in certain circumstances as it related to firearms-related offenses. Everyone has spoken of the number of firearms-related offenses that are taking place in this country. I'm not going to repeat the statistics. Former Commissioner of Police McDonald Jacob gave us those statistics last year. I'm not going to repeat them. But the short point is that in the face of a real and present danger to this country by gun-wielding criminals, the opposition did not see it fit to support the government's attempts to pass the legislation subject to judicial oversight to keep certain categories of persons on trial for firearms-related offenses behind bars until their trials came up. So they're now back on the streets. And we come here to debate a motion about the government's failure to deal with crime. My office, Madam Speaker, is working with a number of international partners in an overarching review of the Firearms Act in collaboration with United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and key stakeholder agencies throughout Trinidad and Tobago, which will seek to formulate, beg your pardon, a comprehensive overhaul of our firearms law. If I may turn, Madam Speaker, to other attempts at legislation which were not supported. The Interception of Communications Amendment Act proclaimed in January 2021. Even now, there are attempts through the courts to challenge that legislation. We had the anti-gang legislation as well. Again, attempts to challenge that legislation through challenges in the courts by persons who, coincidentally or otherwise, are closely associated with this opposition. Madam Speaker, the opposition is steadfastly opposing the government in withholding support from essential legislation that is intended to enhance and secure the lives of the citizens of this country, notwithstanding the case of Suraj, which I have referred to. In our criminal justice system, the leadership of this government has made significant improvements to the criminal justice system. The restructuring of the court system to provide for divisions of the court, the significant increase in the number of judges, legislative amendments towards the abolition of preliminary inquiries, that piece of legislation known by its acronym as AJIPA, which will shortly be proclaimed, the computerization of the magistracy, the introduction of e-filing at the High Court, the introduction of new criminal procedure rules, the creation and operationalization of the public defender system, which I've mentioned, the introduction of judge-alone trials, the decriminalization of marijuana, the introduction of a national sex offender registry, which currently has 16 listed offenders, are just a few examples of the strides being made in revolutionizing the criminal justice system. And if I may turn lastly, Madam Speaker, to the suggestion that this government is contributing to the breakdown of the social safety net, I want to put something into context. The record will show that on this subject of the social safety net, the opposition is being deliberately obstructionist and acting to the detriment of the people of this country. What do I mean by that? This House will remember the time frame of March 2020.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-6, imputing improper motives.
Overruled.
Thank you. This House will remember the time frame of March 2020 to June 2021, when the COVID pandemic was rife throughout the world and throughout our nation. Every citizen had a role to play in the fight against this unprecedented virus, and this country needed all hands on deck in a unified front to a threat that was capable of decimating the entire nation. We started off not knowing how to deal with it, and it is a tribute to this government, and I applaud the Minister of Health and his team that we have come through today as we have been able to, as successfully as we have. Where was the opposition, Madam Speaker, when we needed every hand on deck? Permit me to remind this House of the COVID-19 litigation matters, which covered habeas corpus, constitutional motions, and judicial review cases largely filed by opposition attorneys from March 2020 to June 2021. A total of 51 matters, which cost the state $14,620,000.
48.1, please. I'm trying to understand the relevance on COVID and this matter.
Overruled.
A total of $14,620,340,000 had to be paid by the government of this country to defend those 51 matters in order successfully, as we eventually did in Suraj, to demonstrate to this country that we were unified in our attempt to fight the scourge. How to answer the question raised by the member for Point-a-Pierre? How does that relate to this motion? $14,620,340,000 translates this way. If we used that money in the Ministry of Health in securing our social safety net, we could have had 3,500 angiograms at $4,000 each, saving 3,500 lives. We could have had 14,736 free dialysis sessions costing $950 each. We could have performed 123 free aortic dissections at a cost of $113,150.25 each. That money could have gone to the social security net.
Please, 48.1, the relevance.
Overruled.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm on the social security net, safety net. If we had allocated that 14 million instead of to health, to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, we would have been able to give aid and succor to individual senior citizens' pensions, 4,177 senior citizens. To the disability grant, we'd have been able to provide aid and succor to 7,310 disability grants. We would have been able to have provided 9,746 minors with disability grants. We would have been able to have provided public assistance grants to 11,246 persons, and we would have been able to have fed, under this food support program, 28,667 persons. Instead, that money had to be used to fight the UNC, challenging the government's efforts to keep this country safe during the COVID period. And that is the relevance of COVID to this debate. We have ensured, notwithstanding the steadfast opposition of this opposition UNC,
Madam
that
Speaker,
despite...
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48.8, this motion is not about the opposition. It's a private member's motion on crime.
Overruled.
We have been able to ensure that despite the economic hardships which the citizenry of this country have faced, we have not neglected our citizens, and we continue to prioritize our spending on our national security apparatus, on our social security net. We have continued to build strong relationships with our international partners, consistently to provide significant training in various fields locally and abroad for the benefit of all stakeholders in the fight against crime in areas such as firearms legislation, plea discussions, plea agreements, anti-corruption, countering online child sexual abuse and exploitation, cybercrime, anti-money laundering, and countering terrorism and countering transnational organized crime. Madam Speaker, in closing, I say that on the facts that I have listened to here today and have been previously presented by those on the government side in answer to this motion, it is clear that this motion is misleading, misguided, and is designed to get the optics on social media for the next press conference. With those few words, Madam Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity to contribute, and may I go on record to acknowledge the efforts of my predecessor in office for a lot of the work that was done by the Ministry of the Attorney General during his tenure and before I took office. Thank you very much.
Okay, honorable members, I think now is a convenient time for us to take the break. We will return at 5:15. 5:15.